that's really low, huh? It barely registers on the stat. I don't know if I have the throat power for this. It's actually been so long since I've like spoken for an for a continuous extended period.
This looks like a pirated copy.
This is a real copy. I've spent money on this book.
Oh,
Why did you
wow.
spend money on this book?
Because I wanted to read it. How am I supposed to how am I supposed to make fun of things if I don't at least see for myself what it's about?
I actually have the hard copy somewhere in my room.
I hope someone bought it for you and you didn't
No.
purchase it with your
No,
own
I bought
money.
it myself. I bought it myself. This is my own copy that I bought. I also have Ready Player 2. Yoka, I looked at the
What's
sword
wrong
art
with
online.
you? I'm leaving this room.
Yoka, I was looking at, I was thumbing through Ready Player 2, and I was like, all right, where does it mention SAO? And it mentions it twice, and it does it
What?
literally in the same context, both times, almost word for word, the same exact words.
That's just lazy.
It's so
What the
bad.
fuck?
It's so bad. It hurt.
Okay, if you've read any selections of this book, you would know the whole book's lazy. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean that's it's a BuzzFeed article, but in novel quote unquote form.
This is literally just name dropping pop culture stuff and being like, "Hey, I know that." Like the entire point of the novel is banking on the viewers or the readers being like, "Oh, I get that reference. Oh, I'm so cool. Wow."
Have you guys
Holy shit.
seen the review? Have you guys read these? Look at the praise it's getting.
An adrenaline shot of uncut geekdom.
Uh uh okay.
What? The pure, unfettered brain scream of a child of the 80s.
All right, you guys. All right, it's time. Ready Player One by Ernest Cline. Blah 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 blah. Everyone my age remembers where they were and what they were doing when they first heard about the contest. I was sitting in my hideout watching cartoons when the news bulletin broke in on my video feed announcing that James Halliday had died during the night. I'd heard of Halliday, of course. Everyone had. He was a video game designer responsible for creating the Oasis, a massively multiplayer online game that had gradually evolved into the globally networked virtual reality most of humanity now used on a daily basis. The unprecedented success of the Oasis had made Halliday one of the wealthiest people in the world. Yoko. At first, I couldn't understand why the media was making such a big deal of the billionaire's death. After all, the people of planet Earth had other concerns: the ongoing energy crisis, catastrophic climate change, widespread famine, poverty, and disease. Half a dozen wars, dogs and cats living together, mass hysteria. Normally, the news feeds didn't interrupt everyone's interactive sitcoms and soap operas. Unless something really major had happened, like the outbreak of some new killer virus or another major city vanishing in a mushroom cloud. big stuff like that. As famous as he was, Halliday's death should have warranted only a brief segment of the evening news so the unwashed masses could shake their heads in envy when the newscasters announced the obscenely large amount of money that would be doled out to the rich man's heirs. But that was the rub. James Halliday had no heirs. He had died a 67-year-old bachelor with no living relatives and by most accounts without a single friend. Wait, without a single friend. He had spent the last 15 years of his life in self-imposed isolation, during which time, if the rumors were to be believed, he'd gone completely insane. So the real jaw-dropping news that January morning, the news that had everyone from Toronto to Tokyo crapping in their cornflakes, concerned the contents of Halliday's last will and testament and the fate of his vast fortune. Halliday had prepared a short video message along with the instructions that it be released to the world media at the time of his death. He had also arranged to have a copy of the video emailed to every single Oasis user that same morning. I still remember hearing the familiar electronic chime when it arrived in my inbox just a few seconds after I saw that first news bulletin. His video message was actually a meticulously constructed short film titled Anorak's Invitation. A famous eccentric, Halliday had harbored a lifelong obsession with the 1980s, the decade during which he'd been a teenager, and Anorak's Invitation was crammed with obscure 80s pop culture references, nearly all of which were lost on me the first time I viewed it. The entire video was just over 5 minutes in length, and in the days and weeks that followed, it would become the most scrutinized piece of film in history, surpassing even the Zapruder film in the amount of painstaking frame-by-frame analysis devoted to it. My entire generation would come to know every second of Halliday's message by heart. Anorak's Invitation begins with the sound of trumpets, the opening of an old song called Dead Man's Party. The song plays over a dark screen for the first few seconds until the trumpets are joined by a guitar, and that's when Halliday appears. But he's not a 67-year-old man ravaged by time and illness. He looks just as he did on the cover of Time magazine back in 2014, a tall, thin, healthy man in his early 40s with unkempt hair and his trademark horn-rimmed eyeglasses. He's also wearing the same clothing he wore in the Time cover photo, faded jeans and a vintage Space Invaders t-shirt. Halliday is at a high school dance being held in a large gymnasium. He's surrounded by teenagers whose clothing, hairstyles, and dance moves all indicate that the time period is the late 1980s. Halliday is dancing too, something no one ever saw him do in real life. Grinning maniacally, he spins in rapid circles, swinging his arms and head in time with the song, flawlessly cycling through several signature 80s dance moves. But Halliday has no dance partner. He is, as the saying goes, dancing with himself. A few lines of text appear briefly at the lower left-hand corner of the screen, listing the name of the band, the song's title, the record label, and the year of release, as if this were an old music video airing on MTV Oingo Boingo, Dead Man's Party, MCA Records, 1985. When the lyrics kick in, Halliday begins to lip-sync along, still gyrating, all dressed up with nowhere to go, walking with the... I'm not gonna sing this part out, come on. I don't know. I can't do this bit. You guys will have to forget.
Oh, come on, Tuna.
I can't.
Up with nowhere to go,
I don't know the
walking
song.
with a dead man over my shoulder. Don't run away, it's only me. There.
Thank you,
go.
Yoko. He abruptly stops dancing and makes a cutting motion with his right hand, silencing the music. At the same moment, the dancers and the gymnasium behind him vanish, and the scene around him suddenly changes. Halliday now stands at the front of a funeral parlor, next to an open casket. A second, much older Halliday lies inside the casket, his body emaciated and ravaged by cancer. Shiny quarters cover each of his eyelids. The younger Halliday gazes down at the corpse of his older self with mock sadness, then turns to address the assembled mourners. Halliday snaps his fingers and a scroll appears in his right hand. He opens it with a flourish, and it unfurls to the floor, unraveling down the aisle in front of him. He breaks the fourth wall, addressing the viewer, and begins to read. I'm sorry, just trying to think of a voice to do. I, James Donovan Halliday, being of sound mind and disposing memory, do hereby make, publish, and declare this instrument to be my last will and testament, hereby revoking any and all wills, codicils by me at any time heretofore made. He continues reading, faster and faster, plowing through several more paragraphs of legalese until he's speaking so rapidly that the words are intelligible. Then he stops abruptly. Forget it, he says. Even at that speed, it would take me a month to read the whole thing. Sad to say, I don't have that kind of time. My bad, just got walked in on. Oh. He drops the scroll and it vanishes in a shower of gold dust. Let me just give you the highlights. The funeral parlor vanishes and the scene changes once again. Halliday now stands in front of an immense bank vault door. My entire estate, including a controlling share of stock in my company, Gregarious Simulation Systems, is to be placed in escrow until such a time as a single condition I have set forth in my will is met. The first individual to meet that condition will inherit my entire fortune, currently valued in excess of $240 billion. Yo, that'd be actually spooky. The vault door swings open and Halliday walks inside. The interior of the vault is enormous and it contains a huge stack of gold bars roughly the size of a large house. Here's the dough I'm putting up for grabs, Halliday says, grinning broadly. What the hell? You can't take it with you, right? Halliday leans against a stack of gold bars and the camera pulls in tight on his face. Now, I'm sure you're wondering, what do you have to do to get your hands on all this moolah? Well, hold your horses, kids, I'm getting there. I'm getting to that. He pauses dramatically, his expression changing to that of a child about to reveal a very big secret. Halliday snaps his fingers again, and the vault disappears. In the same instant, Halliday shrinks and morphs into a small boy wearing brown corduroys and a faded The Muppet Show t-shirt. The young Halliday stands in a cluttered living room with burnt orange carpeting, wood-paneled walls, and kitschy late 70s decor. A 21-inch Zenith television sits nearby with an Atari 2600 game console hooked up to it. This is the first video game system I ever owned, Halliday says, now in a child's voice. An Atari 2600? I got it for Christmas in 1979. He plops down in front of the Atari, picks up joystick, and begins to play. My favorite video game was this one, he says, nodding at the TV screen, where a small square is traveling through a series of simple mazes. It was called Adventure. Like many early video games, Adventure was designed and programmed by just one person. But back then, Atari refused to give its programmers credit for their work, so the name of the game's creator didn't actually appear anyway on the packaging. On the TV screen, we see Halliday use a sword to slay a red dragon. Although due to the game's crude, low-resolution graphics, this looks more like a square using an arrow to stab a deformed duck. Is Halliday a match with dementia? So the guy who created Adventure, a man named Warren Robinett, decided to hide his name inside the game itself. He hid a key in one of the game's labyrinths. If you found this key, a small pixel-sized gray dot, you could use it to enter a secret room where Robinett had hidden his name. On the TV, Halliday guides his square protagonist into the game's secret room, where the words "created by Warren Robinett" appear in the center of the screen. This, Halliday says, pointing to the screen with genuine reverence, was the very first video game Easter egg Robin had hidden in his game's code without telling a soul, and Atari manufactured and shipped Adventure all over the world without knowing about the secret room. They didn't find out about the Easter egg's existence until a few months later, when kids all over the world began to discover it. I was one of those kids, and finding Robinette's Easter egg for the first time was one of the coolest video game experiences in my life. The young Halliday drops his joystick and stands. As he does, the living room fades away and the scene shifts again. Halliday now stands in a dim cavern where light from unseen torches flickers off the damp walls. In the same instant, Halliday's appearance also changes once again as he morphs into his famous Oasis avatar, Anorak, a tall-robed wizard with a slightly more handsome version of the adult Halliday's face, minus the eyeglasses. Anorak is dressed in his trademark black robes, with his avatar's emblem, a large calligraphic letter A, embroidered on each sleeve. "Before I died," Anorak says, speaking in a much deeper voice, "I created my own Easter egg and hid it somewhere inside my most popular video game, The Oasis. The first person to find my Easter egg will inherit my entire fortune." Another dramatic pause. "The egg is well hidden. I didn't just leave it lying under a rock somewhere. I suppose you could say that it's locked inside a safe that is buried in a secret room that lies at the center of a maze located somewhere," he reaches up to tap his right temple, "up here. But don't worry, I've left a few clues lying around to get everyone started. And here's the first one." Anorak makes a grand gesture with his right hand and 3 keys appear, spinning slowly in the air in front of him. They appear to be made of copper, jade, and clear crystal. As the keys continue to spin, Anorak recites a piece of verse, and as he speaks each line, it appears briefly in flaming subtitles across the bottom of the screen. He puts on his robes. 3 hidden keys open 3 secret gates, wherein the errant will be tested for worthy traits, and those with the skill to survive these straits will reach the end where the prize awaits. As he finishes, the jade and crystal keys vanish, leaving only the copper key, which now hangs on a chain around Anorak's neck. The camera follows Anorak as he turns and continues further into the dark cavern. A few seconds later, he arrives at a pair of massive wooden doors set into the cavern's rocky wall. These doors are banded with steel, and there are shields and dragons carved into their surfaces. "I couldn't playtest this particular game, so I worried that I may have hidden my Easter egg a little too well. Made it a little too difficult to reach. I'm not sure. If that's the case, it's too late to change anything now, so I guess we'll see." Anorak throws open the double doors, revealing an immense treasure chest filled with piles of glittering gold coins and jewel-encrusted goblets. Then he steps into the open doorway and turns to face the viewer, stretching his arms to hold open the giant double doors. "So without further ado," Anorak announces, "let the hunt for Halliday's Easter egg begin." Then he vanishes in a flash of light, leaving the viewer to gaze through the open doorway at the glittering mounds of treasure that lay beyond. Then the screen fades to black. They didn't take it. Yeah, look, Kaiba didn't use a girl avatar. He just wanted RP, dude.
He wanted a live action D&D session.
He wanted a live action D&D session. Oh.
I want to be the bad guy. I'm the Demon King. Come at me.
I want to play the big bad.
At the end of the video, Halliday included a link to his personal website, which had changed drastically on the morning of his death. For over a decade, the only thing posted there had been a short looping animation that showed his avatar, Anorak, sitting in a medieval library, hunched over a scarred work table, mixing potions and poring over dusty spellbooks, with a large painting of a black dragon visible on the wall behind him. But now, that animation was gone, and in its place there was a high score list like those that used to appear in old coin-operated video games. The list had 10 numbered spots that each displayed the initials JDH, James Donovan Halliday, followed by a score of 6 zeros. This high score list quickly came to be known as the scoreboard. Just below the scoreboard was an icon that looked like a small leather-bound book, which linked to a free downloadable copy of Anorak's Almanac, a collection of hundreds of Halliday's undated journal entries. The almanac was over 1,000 pages long, but it contained few details about Halliday's personal life or his day-to-day activities. Most of the entries were his stream of consciousness observations on various classic video games, science fiction, and fantasy novels, movies, comic books, and 80s pop culture, mixed with humorous diatribes denouncing everything from organized religion to diet soda. The Hunt, as the contest came to be known, quickly wove its way into global culture. Like winning the lottery, finding Halliday's Easter egg became a popular fantasy among adults and children alike. It was a game anyone could play, and at first, there seemed to be no right or wrong way to play it. The only thing Anorak's Almanac seemed to indicate was that a familiarity with Halliday's various obsessions would be essential to finding the egg. This led to a global fascination with 1980s pop culture. 50 years after the decade had ended, the movies, music, games, and fashions of the 1980s were all the rage once again. By 2041, spiked hair and acid-wash jeans were back in style, and the covers of hit 80s pop songs by contemporary bands dominated the music charts. People who had actually been teenagers in the 1980s, all now approaching old age, had a strange experience of seeing the fads and fashions of their youth embraced and studied by their grandchildren. A new subculture was born, composed of the millions of people who now devoted every free moment of their lives to searching for Halliday's egg. At first, these individuals were known simply as egg hunters, but this was quickly truncated to the nickname Beaters. During the
gotta be
first
kidding
year
me.
of the hunt, being a beater was highly fashionable, and nearly every Oasis user claimed to be one. When the first anniversary of Halliday's death arrived, the fervor surrounding the contest began to die down. An entire year had passed, and no one had found anything, not a single key or gate. Part of the problem was the sheer size of the Oasis. It contained thousands of simulated worlds where the keys might be hidden, and it could take a beater years to conduct a thorough search of any one of them. Despite all of the professional beaters who boasted on their blogs that they were getting closer to a breakthrough every day, the truth gradually became apparent. No one really even knew exactly what it was they were looking for, or where to start looking. Another year passed, and another. Still nothing. The general public lost all interest in the contest. People began to assume it was all just an outlandish hoax perpetrated by a rich nut job. Others believed that even if the egg really did exist, no one was ever going to find it. Meanwhile, the Oasis continued to evolve and grow in popularity, protected from takeover attempts and legal challenges by the ironclad terms of Halliday's will and the army of rabid lawyers he had tasked with administering his estate. Halliday's Easter egg gradually moved into the realm of urban legend, and the ever-dwindling tribe of beaters gradually became the object of ridicule. Each year on the anniversary of Halliday's death, newscasters jokingly reported on their continued lack of progress, and each year more beaters called it quits, concluding that Halliday had indeed made the egg impossible to find. And another year went by. And another. And then, on the evening of February 11, 2045, an avatar's name appeared at the top of the scoreboard for the whole world to see. After 5 long years, the copper key had finally been found by an 18-year-old kid living in a trailer park on the outskirts of Oklahoma City. That kid was me. Dozens of books, cartoons, movies, and miniseries have attempted to tell the story of everything that happened next, but every single one of them got it wrong. So I want to set the record straight, once and for all. Oh, and then the footnotes, because they kind of needed footnotes for these references for some reason.
I hate this guy. Why is there footnotes,
A
man?
freeze frame of this scene appears nearly identical to a painting by Jeff Easley that appeared on the cover of Dungeon Master's Guide, a Dungeons and Dragons rulebook published in 1983.
That was the biggest nerd face thing I've seen. Holy shit.
Level 1. Being human totally sucks most of the time. Video games are the only thing that make life bearable. Anorak's Almanac, Chapter 91, verses... This... You kidding? This is a verse?
Bruh.
This... The things I gotta do, I swear to God, man.
This was your idea.
I was jolted awake by the sound of gunfire in one of the neighboring stacks. The shots were followed by a few minutes of muffled shouting and screaming, then silence. Gunfire wasn't uncommon in the stacks, but it still shook me up. I knew I probably wouldn't be able to fall back asleep, so I decided to kill the remaining hours until dawn by brushing up on a few coin-op classics. Galaga, Defender, Asteroids. These games were outdated digital dinosaurs that had become museum pieces long before I was born, but I was a beater. So I didn't think of them as quaint low-res antiques. To me, they were hallowed artifacts, pillars of the pantheon. When I played the classics, I did so with a determined sort of reverence. I was curled up in an old sleeping bag in the corner of the trailer's tiny laundry room, wedged into the gap between the wall and the dryer. I wasn't welcome in my aunt's room across the hall, which was fine by me. I preferred to crash in the laundry room anyway. It was warm, it afforded me a limited amount of privacy, and the wireless reception wasn't too bad. As an added bonus, the room smelled like liquid detergent and fabric softener. The rest of the trailer reeked of cat piss and abject poverty. Most of the time I slept in my hideout, but the temperature had dropped below zero the past few nights, and as much as I hated staying at my aunt's place, it still beat freezing to death. A total of 15 people lived in my aunt's trailer. She slept in the smallest of its 3 bedrooms. The Depperts lived in the bedroom adjacent to hers, and the Millers occupied the large master bedroom at the end of the hall. There were 6 of them, and they paid the largest share of the rent. Our trailer wasn't as crowded as some of the other units in the stacks. It was a double wide, plenty of room for everybody. I pulled out my laptop and powered it on. It was a bulky, heavy beast, almost 10 years old. I found it in a trash bin behind the abandoned strip mall across the highway. I've been able to coax it back to life by replacing its system memory and reloading the Stone Age operating system. The processor was slower than a sloth by current standards, but it was fine for my needs. The laptop served as my portable research library, video arcade, and home theater system. Its hard drive was filled with old books, movies, TV show episodes, song files, and nearly every video game made in the 20th century. I booted up my emulator and selected Robotron 2084, one of my all-time favorite games. I'd always loved its frenetic pace and brutal simplicity. Robotron was all about instinct and reflexes. Playing old video games never failed to clear my mind and set me at ease. If I was feeling depressed or frustrated about my lot in life, all I had to do was tap the player 1 button and my worries would instantly slip away as my mind focused itself on the relentless, pixelated onslaught on the screen in front of me. There, inside the game's 2-dimensional universe, life was simple. It's just you against the machine. Move with your left hand, shoot with your right, and try to stay alive as long as possible. I spent a few hours blasting through wave after wave of brains, spheroids, quarks, and hulks in my unending battle to save the last human family, but eventually, my fingers started to cramp up and it began to lose my rhythm. When that happened at this level, things deteriorated quickly. I quickly burned through all my extra lives in a matter of minutes, and my 2 least favorite words appeared on the screen. Game over. I shut down the emulator and began to browse through my video files. Over the past 5 years, I downloaded every single movie, TV show, and cartoon mentioned in Anorak's almanac. I still hadn't watched all of them yet, of course. That would probably take decades. I selected an episode of Family Ties, an 80s sitcom about a middle class family living in central Ohio. I downloaded the show because it had been one of Halliday's favorites, and I figured there was a chance that some clue related to the hunt might be hidden in one of the episodes. I'd become addicted to the show immediately and had now watched all 180 episodes multiple times. I never seemed to get tired of them. Sitting alone in the dark watching the show on my laptop, I always found myself imagining that I lived in that warm, well-lit house and that those smiling, understanding people were my family. That there was nothing so wrong in the world that we couldn't sort it out by the end of a single half-hour episode, or maybe a two-parter if it was something really serious. My own home life had never even remotely resembled the one depicted in Family Ties, which was probably why I loved the show so much. I was the only child of two teenagers, both refugees who'd met in the stacks where I'd grown up. I don't remember my father. When I was just a few months old, he was shot dead while looting a grocery store during a power blackout. The only thing I really knew about him was that he loved comic books. I found several old flash drives in a box of his things containing complete runs of The Amazing Spider-Man, The X-Men, and Green Lantern. My mom once told me that my dad had given me an alliterative name, Wade Watts, because he thought it sounded like the secret identity of a superhero, like Peter Parker or Clark Kent. Knowing that made me think he must have been a cool guy, despite how he died. Dude. He's a cool guy when he gets shot trying to loot a grocery store, dude. Come on. My mother, Loretta, had raised me on her own. We had lived in a small RV in another part of the stacks. She had two full-time Oasis jobs, one as a telemarketer, the other as an escort in an online brothel. She used to make me wear earplugs at night so I wouldn't hear her in the next room talking dirty to tricks in other time zones, but the earplugs didn't work very well, so I would watch old movies instead with the volume turned way up. I was introduced to the Oasis at an early age because my mother used it as a virtual babysitter. As soon as I was old enough to wear a visor and a pair of haptic gloves, my mom helped me create my first Oasis avatar. Then she stuck me in a corner and went back to work, leaving me to explore an entirely new world, very different from the one I'd known up until then. From that moment on, I was more or less raised by the Oasis's interactive educational programs, which any kid could access for free. I spent a big chunk of my childhood hanging out in a virtual reality simulation of Sesame Streets, singing songs with friendly Muppets, and playing interactive games that taught me how to walk, talk, add, subtract, read, write, and share. Once I'd mastered those skills, it didn't take me long to discover that the Oasis was also the world's biggest public library, where even a penniless kid like me had access to every book ever written, every song ever recorded, and every movie, television show, video game, and piece of artwork ever created. The collected knowledge, art, and amusements of all human civilization were there, waiting for me. But gaining access to all of that information turned out to be something of a mixed blessing, because that was when I found out the truth. I don't know, maybe your experience differed from mine. For me, growing up as a human being on the planet Earth in the 21st century was a real kick in the teeth, existentially speaking. The worst thing about being a kid was that no one told me the truth about my situation. In fact, they did the exact opposite. And of course, I believed them because I was just a kid and I didn't know any better. I mean, Christ, my brain hadn't even grown to full size yet. So how could I be expected to know when the adults were bullshitting me? So I swallowed all of the Dark Ages nonsense they fed me. Some time passed, I grew up a little, and eventually, gradually began to figure out that pretty much everyone had been lying to me about pretty much everything since the moment I emerged from my mother's womb. This was an alarming revelation. It gave me trust issues later in life. I started to figure out the ugly truth as soon as I began to explore the free Oasis libraries. The facts are right there, waiting for me, hidden in old books written by people who weren't afraid to be honest. Artists and scientists and philosophers and poets, many of them long dead. As I read the words they left behind, I finally began to get a grip on the situation, my situation, our situation. What most people referred to as the human condition. It was not good news. I wish someone had just told me the truth right up front, as soon as I was old enough to understand it. I wish someone had just said, "Here's the deal, Wade. You're something called a human being. That's a really smart kind of animal. Like every other animal on this planet, we've descended from a single-celled organism that lived millions of years ago. This happened by a process called evolution, and you'll learn more about it later. But trust me, that's really how we all got here. That's the proof of it everywhere, buried in the rocks. That story you heard about how we're all created by some super powerful dude named God who lives up in the sky? Total bullshit. The whole God thing is actually an ancient fairy tale that people have been telling one another for thousands of years. We made it all up, like Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny. Oh, and by the way, there's no Santa Claus or Easter Bunny. Also bullshit. Sorry, kid. Deal with it. You're probably wondering what happened before we got here. An awful lot of stuff, actually. Once we evolved into humans, things got pretty interesting. We figured out how to grow food and domesticate animals, so we didn't have to spend all our time hunting. Our tribes got so much bigger, we spread across the entire planet like an unstoppable virus. Then after fighting a bunch of wars with each other over land resources, and our made-up gods, we eventually got all of our tribes organized into a global civilization. But honestly, it was not that organized or civilized, and we continue to fight a lot of wars with each other. But we also figured out how to do science, which helped us develop technology. For a bunch of hairless apes, we'd actually managed to invent some pretty incredible things. Computers, medicine, lasers, microwave ovens, artificial hearts, atomic bombs. We even sent a few guys to the moon and brought them back. We also created a global communications network that let us all talk to each other all around the world all the time. Pretty impressive, right? But that's where the bad news comes in. Our global civilization came at a huge cost. We needed a whole bunch of energy to build it, and we got that energy by burning fossil fuels, which came from dead plants and animals buried in the ground. We used up most of this fuel before you got here. Now it's pretty much all gone. This means we no longer have enough energy to keep our civilization running like it was before. So we've had to cut back big time. We call this the big global energy crisis, and it's been going on for a while now. Also, turns out burning all those fossil fuels had some nasty side effects like raising the temperature of our planet, screwing with the environment. Some of the polar ice caps are melting, sea levels rising, weather all messed up, plants and animals dying off in record numbers, lots of people starving and homeless, and we're still fighting wars with each other, mostly over the few resources we have. Basically, kid, what this all means is that life is a lot tougher than it used to be. In the good old days, back before you was born, things used to be awesome, but now they're kind of terrifying. To be honest, the future don't look too bright. You were born at a pretty crappy time in history, and it looks like things are only gonna get worse from here on out. Human civilization is in decline. Some people even say it collapsing. Probably wondering what's gonna happen to you. That's easy. Same thing gonna happen to you that's happened to every other human being who's ever lived. You're going to die. We all die. That's just how it is. What happens when you die? Well, we're not completely sure, but the evidence seems to suggest that nothing happens. You're just dead. Your brain stops working, and then you're not around to ask annoying questions anymore. Those stories you heard about going to a wonderful place called heaven, where there's no more pain or death, and you live forever in a state of perpetual happiness, also total bullshit. Just like all that God stuff. There's no evidence of a heaven and there never was. We made that up too. Wishful thinking. So now you have to live the rest of your life knowing you're gonna die someday and disappear forever. Sorry. Okay, on second thought, maybe honesty isn't the best policy after all. Maybe it wasn't a good idea to tell a newly arrived human being that he's been born into a world of chaos, pain, and poverty just in time to watch everything fall to pieces. I discovered all that gradually over several years, and it still made me feel like jumping off a bridge. Luckily, I had access to the Oasis, which was like having an escape hatch into a better reality. The Oasis kept me safe. My playground, my preschool, magical place where anything was possible. The Oasis is the setting of all my happiest childhood memories. When my mom didn't have to work, we would log in at the same time and play games or go on interactive storybook adventures together. She used to have to force me to log out every night because I never wanted to return to the real world because the real world sucked. I never blamed my mom for the way things were. She was a victim of fate and cruel circumstance. Just like everyone else, her generation had it the hardest. She'd been born into a world of plenty, then had to watch it all slowly vanish. More than anything, I remember feeling sorry for her. She was depressed all the time, and taking drugs seemed to be the only thing she truly enjoyed. Of course, they were what eventually killed her. When I was 11 years old, she shot a bad batch of something into her arm and died on a ratty fold-out sofa bed while listening to music on an old MP3 player I had repaired and given to her the previous Christmas. F in the chat. F in the chat for Wade's mommy. F in the chat. I'm crying. Crying. Oh no. Oh no, no, no. That was when I had to move in with my mom's sister, Alice. Aunt Alice didn't take me in out of. Okay. Okay, think I can laugh it all out of my system.
Are you sure about that?
Okay. Aunt Alice didn't take me in out of kindness or familial responsibility. She did it to get the extra food vouchers from the government every month. Most of the time, I had to find food on my own. This usually wasn't a problem because I had a talent for finding and fixing old computers and busted Oasis consoles, which I sold to pawn shops or traded for food vouchers. I earned enough to keep from going hungry, which was more than a lot of my neighbors could say. The year after my mom died, I spent a lot of time wallowing in self-pity and despair. I tried to look on the bright side to remind myself that, orphaned or not, I was still better than most of the kids in Africa and Asia and North America too. I'd always had a roof over my head and more than enough food to eat, and I had the Oasis. My life wasn't so bad, at least that's what I kept telling myself in a vain attempt to stave away the epic loneliness I now felt. Then, the hunt for Halliday's Easter egg began. That was what saved me, I think. Suddenly, I found something worth doing, a dream worth chasing. For the last 5 years, the hunt had given me a goal and purpose, a quest to fulfill, a reason to get up in the morning, something to look forward to. The moment I began searching for the egg, the future no longer seemed so bleak. I was halfway through the fourth episode of my Family Ties mini marathon when the laundry room door creaked open and my Aunt Alice walked in, a malnourished harpy in a housecoat, clutching a basket of dirty clothes. She looked more lucid than usual, which was bad news. She was much easier to deal with when she was high. She glanced over at me with the usual disdain and started to load her clothes into the washer. Then her expression changed, and she peeked around the dryer to get a better look at me. Her eyes went wide when she spotted my laptop. I quickly closed it and began to shove it into my backpack, but I knew it was already too late. "Hand it over, Wade," she ordered, reaching for the laptop. "I can pawn it to help pay our rent." "No," I shouted, twisting away from her. "Come on, Aunt Alice, I need it for school." "What you need is to show some gratitude," she barked. "Everyone else around here has to pay rent. I'm tired of you leeching off of me." "You keep all my food vouchers. That more than covers my share of the rent." "The hell it does!" She tried again to grab the laptop out of my hands, but I refused to let go of it. So she turned and stomped back to her room. I knew what was coming next, so I quickly entered a command on my laptop that locked its keyboard and erased the hard drive. Alice returned a few seconds later with her boyfriend Rick, who was still half asleep. Rick was perpetually shirtless because he liked to show off his impressive collection of prison tattoos. Without saying a word, he walked over and raised a fist at me threateningly. I flinched, handed over the laptop. Then he and Aunt Alice walked out, already discussing how much the computer might fetch at a pawn shop. Losing the laptop wasn't a big deal. I had 2 spares stowed in my hideout, but they weren't nearly as fast, and I would have to reload all of my media onto them from backup drives, a total pain in the ass. But it was my own fault. I knew the risk of bringing anything of value back here. The dark blue light of dawn was starting to creep into the laundry room window. I decided it might be a good idea to leave for school a little early today. I dressed as quickly as possible, and I dressed as quickly and quietly as possible, pulling on the worn corduroy, baggy sweater, and oversized coat that comprised my entire winter wardrobe. Then I put on my backpack, climbed up onto the washing machine. After pulling on my gloves, I slid open the frost-covered window. The Arctic morning air stung my cheeks as I gazed out over the uneven sea of trailer rooftops. My aunt's trailer was the top unit in a stack, 22 mobile homes high, making it a level or two taller than the majority of the stacks immediately surrounding it. The trailers on the bottom level rested on the ground or on their original concrete foundations, but the units stacked above them were suspended on a reinforced modular scaffold, a haphazard metal latticework that had been constructed piecemeal over the years. We lived in the Portland Avenue stacks, a sprawling hive of discolored tin shoeboxes rusting on the shores of I-40 just west of Oklahoma City's decaying skyscraper core. It was a collection of over 500 individual stacks, all connected to each other by a makeshift network of recycled pipes, girders, support beams, and footbridges. The spires of a dozen ancient construction cranes used to do the actual stacking were positioned around the stack's ever-expanding outer perimeter. The top level, or roof of the stacks, was blanketed with a patchwork array of old solar panels that provided supplemental power to the units below. A bundle of hoses and the corrugated tubing snaked up and down the side of each stack, supplying water to each trailer and carrying away sewage, luxuries not available in some of the other stacks scattered around the city. Very little sunlight made it to the bottom level, known as the floor. The dark, narrow strips of ground between the stacks were clogged with the skeletons of abandoned cars and trucks, their gas tanks emptied and their exit routes blocked off long ago. One of our neighbors, Mr. Miller, once explained to me that trailer parks like ours had originally consisted of a few dozen mobile homes arranged in neat rows on the ground. But after the large oil crash and the onset of the energy crisis, large cities had been flooded with refugees from surrounding suburban and rural areas, resulting in a massive urban housing shortage. Real estate within walking distance of a big city became far too valuable to waste on a flat plane of mobile homes, so someone had cooked up the brilliant idea of, as Mr. Miller put it, stacking the sumbitches to maximize the use of ground space. The idea caught on in a big way, and trailer parks across the country had quickly evolved into stacks like this one, strange hybrids of shanty towns, squatter settlements, and refugee camps. They were now scattered around the outskirts of most major cities, each one overflowing with uprooted rednecks like my parents who, desperate for work, food and electricity, and reliable oasis access, had fled their dying small towns and had used the last of their gasoline or their beasts of burden to haul their families, RVs, and trailer homes to the nearest metropolis. Every stack in our park stood at least 15 mobile homes high, with the occasional RV, shipping container, Airstream trailer, or Volkswagen microbus mixed in for variety. In recent years, many of the stacks had grown to a height of 20 units or more. This made a lot of people nervous. Stack collapses weren't that uncommon, and if the scaffold supports buckled at the wrong angle, the domino effect could bring down 4 or 5 of the neighboring stacks too. Our trailer was near the northern edge of the stacks, which ran up a crumbling highway overpass. From my vantage point at the laundry room window, I could see a thin stream of electric vehicles crawling along the cracked asphalt, carrying goods and workers into the city. As I stared out at the grim skyline, a bright sliver of the sun peeked over the horizon. Watching it rise, I performed a mental ritual. Whenever I saw the sun, I reminded myself that I was looking at a star. One of over 100 billion stars in our galaxy. A galaxy that was just one of billions of other galaxies in the observable universe. This helped me keep things in perspective. I started doing it after watching a science program from the early 80s called Cosmos. I slipped out the window as quietly as possible and, clutching at the bottom of the window frame, slid down the cold surface of the trailer's metal siding. The steel platform on which the trailer rested was now only slightly wider and longer than the trailer itself, leaving a ledge about 1.5 feet wide all the way around. I carefully lowered myself until my feet rested on this ledge, then reached up to close the window behind me. I grabbed hold of a rope I'd strung there at waist level to serve as a handhold and began to sidestep along the ledge to the corner of the platform. From there, I was able to descend the ladder-like frame of the scaffolding. I almost always took this route when leaving or returning to my aunt's trailer. A rickety metal staircase was bolted to the side of the stack, but it shook and knocked against the scaffolding, so I couldn't use it without announcing my presence. Bad news. In the stacks, it was best to avoid being heard or seen whenever possible. There were often dangerous and desperate people about, the sort who would rob you, rape you, and then sell your organs on the black market. Descending the network of metal girders had always reminded me of old platform video games like Donkey Kong or Burger Time. I'd seized upon this idea a few years earlier when I coded my first Atari 2600 game, a beater rite of passage, like a Jedi building his first lightsaber. It was a Pitfall ripoff called The Stacks, where you had to navigate through a vertical maze of trailers, collecting junk computers, stacking food voucher power-ups, and avoiding meth addicts and pedophiles on your way to school. My game was a lot more fun than the real thing. As I climbed down, I paused next to the Airstream trailer 3 units below ours, where my friend Mrs. Gilmore lived. She was a sweet old lady in her mid-70s, and she always seemed to get up ridiculously early. I peeked in her window and saw her shuffling around in her kitchen, making breakfast. She spotted me after a few seconds, and her eyes lit up. "Wade," she said, cracking open her window. "Good morning, my dear boy." "Good morning, Mrs. G," I said. "I hope I didn't startle you." "Not at all," she said. She pulled her robe tight against a draft coming in the window. "It's freezing out there. Why don't you come in and have some breakfast? I've got some soy bacon, and these powdered eggs aren't too bad if you put enough salt on them." "Thanks, but I can't this morning, Mrs. G. I have to get to school." "All right, rain check then." She blew me a kiss and started to close the window. "Try not to break your neck climbing out there, okay, Spider-Man?" "Will do. See you later, Mrs. G." I waved goodbye to her and continued my descent. Mrs. Gilmore was a total sweetheart. She let me crash on her couch when I needed to, although it was hard for me to sleep there because of all her cats. Mrs. G was super religious and spent most of her time in the Oasis, sitting in the congregation of one of those big online mega churches, singing hymns, listening to sermons, taking virtual tours of the Holy Land. I fixed her ancient Oasis console whenever it went on the fritz, and in return, she answered my endless questions about what it had been like for her to grow up during the 1980s. She knew the coolest bits of 80s trivia, stuff you couldn't learn from books or movies. She was always praying for me, too, trying her hardest to save my soul. I never had the heart to tell her that I thought organized religion was a total crock. It was a pleasant fantasy that gave her hope and kept her going, which was exactly what the hunt was for me. To quote the almanac, "People who live in glass houses should shut the fuck up." When I reached the bottom level, I jumped off the scaffold and dropped the few remaining feet to the ground. My rubber boots crunched into the slush and frozen mud. It was still pretty dark down here, so I took out my flashlight and headed east, weaving my way through the dark maze, doing my best to remain unseen while being careful to avoid tripping over a shopping cart, engine block, or one of the other pieces of junk littering the narrow alleys between the stacks. I rarely saw anyone out at this time of the morning. The commuter shuttles ran only a few times a day, so the residents were lucky enough to have a job would already be waiting at the bus stop by the highway. Most of them worked as day laborers in the giant factory farms that surrounded the city. After walking half a mile, I reached a giant mound of old cars and trucks piled haphazardly along the stack's eastern perimeter. Decades ago, the cranes had cleared the park of as many abandoned vehicles as possible to make room for even more stacks, and they dumped them in huge piles like this all around the settlement's perimeter. Many of them were nearly as tall as the stacks themselves. I walked to the edge of the pile, and after a quick glance around to make sure I wasn't being watched or followed, I turned sideways to squeeze through a gap between two crushed cars. From there, I ducked, clambered, sidestepped my way farther and farther into the ramshackle mountain of twisted metal, until I reached a small open space at the rear of a buried cargo van. Only the rear third of the van was visible, the rest was concealed by the other vehicles stacked on and around it. Two overturned pickup trucks lay across the van's roof at different angles, but most of their weight was supported by the cars stacked on either side, creating a kind of protective arch that had prevented the van from being crushed by the mountain of vehicles piled above it. I pulled out a chain I kept around my neck, on which there hung a single key. In a stroke of luck, this key had been hanging from the van's ignition when I first discovered it. Many of these vehicles had been in working condition when they were abandoned. Their owners had simply no longer been able to afford fuel for them, so they just parked them and walked away. I pocketed my flashlight and unlocked the van's rear right door. It opened about 1.5 feet, giving me just enough room to squeeze inside. I pulled the door closed behind me and locked it again. The van's rear doors had no windows, so I was hunched over in total darkness for a second, until my fingers found the old power strip I duct taped to the ceiling. I flipped it on, and an old desk lamp flooded the tiny space with light. The crumpled green roof of a compact car covered the crushed opening where the windshield had been, but the damage to the van's front end didn't extend beyond the cab. The rest of the interior remained intact. Someone had removed all the van's seats, probably to use as furniture, leaving a small room about 4 feet wide, 4 feet high, and 9 feet long. This was my hideout. I discovered it 4 years earlier while searching for discarded computer parts. When I first opened the door and gazed into the van's darkened interior, I knew right away that I'd found something of immeasurable value: privacy. This was a place no one else knew about, where I wouldn't have to worry about getting hassled or slapped around by my aunt or whatever loser she was currently dating. I could keep my things here without worrying they'd be stolen, and most important, it was a place where I could access the oasis in peace. The van was my refuge, my bat cave, my fortress of solitude. It was where I attended school, did my homework, read books, watched movies, played video games. It was also where I conducted my ongoing quest to find Halliday's Easter egg. I covered the walls, floor, and ceiling with styrofoam egg cartons and pieces of carpeting in an effort to soundproof the van as much as possible. Several cardboard boxes of busted laptops and computer parts sat in the corner next to a rack of old car batteries and a modified exercise bike I'd rigged as a recharger. The only furniture was a folding lawn chair. I dropped my backpack, shrugged off my coat, hopped onto the exercise bike. Charging the batteries was usually the only physical exercise I got each day. I pedaled until the meter said the batteries had a full charge, then sat down in my chair and switched on the small electric heater I kept beside it. I pulled off my gloves and rubbed my hands in front of the filaments as they began to glow bright orange. I couldn't leave the heater on for very long or it would drain the batteries. I opened the rat-proof metal box where I kept my food cache, took out bottled water and a packet of powdered milk. I mixed these two together in a bowl, then dumped in a generous serving of Fruit Rock cereal. Once I'd wolfed it down, I retrieved an old plastic Star Trek lunchbox I kept hidden under the van's crushed dashboard. Inside were my school-issued Oasis console, haptic gloves, and visor. These items were by far the most valuable things I owned. far too valuable to carry around with me. I pulled on my elastic haptic gloves and flexed my fingers to make sure none of the joints were sticking. Then I grabbed my Oasis console, a flat black rectangle about the size of a paperback book. It had a wireless network antenna built into it, but the reception inside the van was for shit, since it was buried under a huge mound of dense metal. So I rigged up an external antenna, mounted it on the hood of a car at the top of the junk pile. The antenna cable snaked up through a hole I'd punched in the van ceiling. I plugged it into a port on the side of the console, then slipped on my visor. It fit snugly around my eyes like a pair of swimmer's goggles, blocking out all external light. Small earbuds extended from the visor's temples and automatically plugged themselves into my ears. The visor also housed two built-in stereo voice microphones to pick up everything I said. I powered on the console and initiated the login sequence. I saw a brief flash of red as the visor scanned my retinas. Then I cleared my throat and said my login passphrase, being careful to enunciate. You have been recruited by the Star League to defend the frontier against Zur and the Kodan Armada. My passphrase was also verified, along with my voice pattern, and then I was logged in. The following text appeared, superimposed in the center of my virtual display. Identity verification successful. Welcome to the Oasis, Parzival. Login completed. 075321 OST 2.10.2045. As the text faded away, it was replaced by a short message just 3 words long. This message had been embedded in the login sequence by James Halliday himself when he'd first programmed the Oasis as an homage to the simulation's direct ancestors, the coin-operated video games of his youth. These 3 words were always the last thing an Oasis user saw before leaving the real world and entering the virtual one. Ready, player 1. And that's the end of chapter 1. Wait, that's the end of chapter 1, part 1. Everybody, we all clapping. I hope everybody's clapping. He said he title dropped. You can't believe it. He did it.
He did it.
He did
did
a
it.
great job.
It's 27 pages. Alright, are we still going? Are we still going?
I'm still here.
Alright.
We haven't left yet.
No. Stop. Stop the
can't-
reading.
I can't believe it
Oh,
only. Huh?
we lost one.
Exorcist is a coward.
Coward.
Why are you even reading this?
For
Why
fun?
not?
It's
That's a
fun.
joke.
It's gonna get even better, dude. We haven't even begun. We haven't
No.
even begun, dude.
It's already so bad.
We haven't even begun. Okay, so this is
a masterpiece.
it's 8. We're 8%. I don't. Okay. If we finish before Guild Wars over, we can start Ready Player 2.
No.
Oh, yay!
I love pain. Oh yes. You know, this is much less bad to read aloud to everybody than it is to like read it to myself, because that's kind of painful, you know? You guys don't know the pain of reading this to yourselves.
Why would we be reading it to ourselves?
Because you get curious as to what this book's about.
Absolutely not.
Yeah, the fun hasn't even begun. My avatar materialized in front of my locker on the second floor of my high school, the exact spot where I'd been standing when I logged out the night before. I glanced up and down the hallway. My virtual surroundings looked almost but not quite real. Everything inside the Oasis was beautifully rendered in 3 dimensions. Unless you pulled focus and stopped to examine your surroundings more closely, it was easy to forget that everything you were seeing was computer generated. and that was with my crappy school-issued Oasis console. I'd heard that if you access the simulation with a new state-of-the-art immersion rig, it was almost impossible to tell the Oasis from reality. I touched my locker door, and it popped open with a soft metallic click. The inside was sparsely decorated, a picture of Princess Leia posing with a blaster pistol, a group photo of the members of Monty Python in their Holy Grail costumes, James Halliday's Time magazine cover. I reached up and tapped the stack of textbooks on the locker's top shelf, and they vanished, then reappeared in my avatar's item inventory. Aside from my textbooks, my avatar had only a few meager possessions: a flashlight, an iron short sword, a small bronze shield, and a suit of banded leather armor. These items were all non-magical and of low quality, but they were the best I could afford. Items in the Oasis had just as much value as things in the real world, sometimes more, and you couldn't pay for them with food vouchers. The Oasis credit was the coin of the realm. And in these dark times, it was also one of the world's most stable. What is cryptocurrency? Come on, guys. It was also one of the world's most stable currencies, valued higher than the dollar, pound, euro, or yen. A small mirror was mounted inside my locker door, and I caught a glimpse of my virtual self as I closed it. I had designed my avatar's face and body to look more or less like my own. My avatar had a slightly smaller nose than me, and he was taller and thinner and more muscular, and he didn't have any teenage acne. But aside from these minor details, we looked more or less identical. The school's strictly enforced dress code required that all student avatars be human and of the same gender and age as the student. No giant two-headed hermaphrodite demon unicorn avatars were allowed. Not in school grounds, anyway. You could give your Oasis avatar any name you liked as long as it was unique, meaning you had to pick a name that hadn't already been taken by someone else. Your avatar's name was also your email address and chat ID, so you wanted it to be cool and easy to remember. Celebrities had been known to pay huge sums of money to buy an avatar name they wanted from a cyber squatter who had already reserved it. Yo, I'm squatting on Yoko Skimori, by the way.
What the fuck? That's my name.
No, it's my name now.
Not anymore, it's not.
When I first created my Oasis account, I'd named my avatar Wade the Great. After that, I kept changing it every few months, usually to something equally ridiculous. My avatar had now had the same name for over 5 years. On the day the hunt began, the day I decided to become a beater, I renamed my avatar Parzival, after the knight of Arthurian legend who had found the Holy Grail. The other more common spellings of that knight's name, Percival and Percival, had already been taken by other users, but I preferred the name Parzival anyway. I thought it had a nice ring to it. People rarely use their real names online. Anonymity was one of the major perks of the Oasis. Inside the simulation, no one knew who you really were unless you wanted them to. Much of the Oasis's popularity and culture were built around this fact. Your real name, fingerprints, retinal patterns were stored in your Oasis account, but gregarious simulation systems kept that information encrypted and confidential. Even GSS's own employees couldn't look up an avatar's true identity. Back when Halliday was still running the company, GSS had won the right to keep every Oasis user's identity private in a landmark Supreme Court ruling. When I'd first enrolled in the Oasis public school system, I was required to give them my real name, avatar name, mailing address, and social security number. That information was stored in my student profile, but only my principal had access to that. None of my teachers or fellow students knew who I really was, or vice versa. Students weren't allowed to use their avatar names while they were at school. This was to prevent teachers from having to say ridiculous names like Pimp Grease, please pay attention, or Big Wang 69, would you stand up and give us your book report? Instead, Students were required to use their real first names followed by a number to differentiate them from other students with the same name. When I enrolled, there had already been 2 other students at my school with the first name Wade, so I'd been assigned the student ID of Wade3. That name floated above my avatar's head whenever I was on school grounds. The school bell rang and a warning flashed in the corner of my display, informing me that I had 40 minutes until the start of first period. I began to walk my avatar down the hall, using a series of subtle hand motions to control its movements and actions. I could also use voice commands to move around if my hands were otherwise occupied.
You okay, buddy?
Bro, that kid in the back of the classroom.
He doesn't have to be in the back of the classroom now.
Dude, I know.
It could be the teacher. It's phasmophobia basically. That's what the control scheme. It's basically phasmophobia. I strolled in the direction of my world history classroom, smiling and waving to the familiar faces I passed. Big Wang 69.
Ah,
I have to give him credit for that. That was pretty funny. I was going to miss this place when I graduated in a few months. I wasn't looking forward to leaving school. I didn't have the money to attend college, not even one in the Oasis, and my grades weren't good enough for a scholarship. My only plan after graduation was to become a full-time beater. I didn't have much choice. Winning the contest was my one chance of escaping the stacks, unless I signed a 5-year indenturement contract with some corporation, and that was about as appealing to me as rolling around in broken glass in my birthday suit. As I continued down the hallway, other students began to materialize in front of their lockers, ghostly apparitions that rapidly solidified. The sound of chattering teenagers began to echo up and down the corridor. Before long, I heard an insult hurled in my direction. Hey, hey, if it isn't Wade 3! I heard a voice shout. I turned and saw Todd 13, an obnoxious avatar I recognized from my Algebra 2 class. He was standing with several of his friends. Great outfit, Slick, he said. Where did you snag the sweet threads? My avatar was wearing a black t-shirt and blue jeans, one of the free default skins you could select when you created your account. Like his Cro-Magnon friends, Todd 13 wore an expensive designer skin, probably purchased in some off-world mall. Your mom bought them for me, I retorted without breaking my stride. Tell her I said thanks. Next time you stop your home to breastfeed and pick up your allowance. Childish, I know, but virtual or not, this was still high school. The more childish an insult, the more effective it was. My jab elicited laughter from a few of his friends, and the other students standing nearby. Todd 13 scowled, and his face actually turned red, a sign that he hadn't bothered to turn off his account's real-time emotion feature, which made your avatar mirror your facial expressions and body language. He was about to reply, but I muted him first, so I didn't hear what he said. I just smiled and continued on my way. The ability to mute my peers was one of my favorite things about attending school online, and I took advantage of it almost daily. The best thing about it was that they could see that you'd muted them, and they couldn't do a damn thing about it. There was no fighting on school grounds. The simulation simply didn't allow it. The entire planet of Ludus was a no PvP zone, meaning that no player versus player combat was permitted. At this school, the only real weapons were words, so I'd become skilled at wielding them. I'd attended school in the real world up until the 6th grade. It hadn't been a very pleasant experience. I was a painfully shy, awkward kid with low self-esteem and almost no social skills as side effect of spending most of my childhood inside the Oasis. Online, I didn't have a problem talking to people or making friends, but in the real world, interacting with other people, especially kids my own age, made me a nervous wreck. I never knew how to act or what to say, and when I did work up the courage to speak, I always seemed to say the wrong thing. My appearance was part of the problem. I was My appearance was part of the problem. I was overweight. and had been for as long as I could remember. My bankrupt diet of government subsidized sugar and starch laden foods was a contributing factor, but I was also an Oasis addict. So the only exercise I usually got back then was running away from bullies before and after school. No. Wade Watts, more like Wade Watts. To make matters worse, my limited wardrobe consisted entirely of ill fitting clothes from thrift stores and donation bins, the social equivalent of having a bullseye painted on my forehead. His avatar isn't overweight. His real body is, because he mentioned earlier when he was describing his avatar that he was like muscular and quote unquote thinner than his real body. Even so, I tried my best to fit in. Year after year, my eyes would scan the lunchroom like a T-1000, searching for a clique that might accept me. But even the other outcasts wanted nothing to do with me. I was too weird, even for the weirdos. And girls, talking to girls was out of the question. To me, they were like an exotic alien species, both beautiful and terrifying. Whenever I got near one of them, I invariably broke out in a cold sweat and lost the ability to speak in complete sentences. For me, school had been a Darwinian exercise, a daily gauntlet of ridicule, abuse, and isolation. By the time I entered 6th grade, I was beginning to wonder if I'd be able to maintain my sanity until graduation, still 6 long years away. Then, one glorious day, our principal announced that any student with a passing grade point average could apply for a transfer to the new Oasis public school system. The real public school system, the one run by the government, had been an underfunded, overcrowded train wreck for decades, and now the conditions at many schools had gotten so terrible that every kid with half a brain was being encouraged to stay at home and attend school online. I nearly broke my neck sprinting to the school office to submit my application. It was accepted, and I transferred to Oasis Public School number 1873 the following semester. 1 second. Uh, Prior to my transfer, my Oasis avatar had never left Incipio, the planet at the center of Sector 1, where new avatars were spawned at the time of their creation. There wasn't much to do on Incipio except chat with other noobs or shop in one of the giant virtual malls that covered the planet. If you wanted to go somewhere more interesting, you had to pay a teleportation fare to get there, and that cost money, something I didn't have. So my avatar was stranded in Incipio, that is, until my new school emailed me a teleportation voucher to cover the cost of my avatar's transport to Ludus, the planet where all of the Oasis public schools were located. There were hundreds of school campuses here on Ludus, spread out evenly across the planet's surface. The schools were all identical because the same construction code was copied and pasted into a different location whenever a new school was needed. And since the buildings were just pieces of software, the design wasn't limited by monetary constraints or even by the laws of physics. So every school was a grand palace of learning with polished marble hallways, cathedral-like classrooms, zero-G gymnasiums, and virtual libraries containing every school board approved book ever written. Wait, why do I have that? Yeah, why do they have virtual gym class? That doesn't make any sense.
We gotta keep the mind active. That's all.
Wait a second.
Hold on. On my first day at OPS number 1873, I thought I died and gone to heaven. Now, instead of running a gauntlet of bullies and drug addicts on my walk to school each morning, I went straight to my hideout and stayed there all day. Best of all, in the Oasis, no one could tell that I was fat, that I had acne, or that I wore the same shabby clothes every week. Bullies couldn't pelt me with spitballs, give me atomic wedgies, or pummel me by the bike rack after school. No one could touch me. In here, I was safe. When I arrived in my world history classroom, several students were already seated at their desks. Their avatars all sat motionless with their eyes closed. This was a signal that they were engaged, meaning they were currently on phone calls, browsing the web, or logged into chat rooms. It was poor Oasis etiquette to try to talk to an engaged avatar. They usually just ignored you, and you get an automated message telling you to piss off. I took a seat at my desk and tapped the engage icon at the edge of my display. My own avatar's eyes slid shut, but I could still see my surroundings. I tapped another icon, and a large two-dimensional web browser window appeared, suspended in space directly in front of me. Windows like this one were visible to only my avatar, so no one could read over my shoulder unless I selected the option to allow it. My homepage was set to the Hatchery, one of the more popular beater message forums. The Hatchery site interface was designed to look and operate like a pre-internet dial-up bulletin board system, complete with the screech of a 300 baud modem during the login sequence. Very cool. I spent a few minutes scanning the most recent message threads, taking in the latest beater news and rumors. I rarely posted anything to the boards, even though I made sure to check them every day. I didn't see much interest this morning. The usual beater clan flame wars, ongoing arguments about the correct interpretation of some cryptic passages in Anarch's Almanac, high-level avatars bragging about some new magic item or artifact they'd attained. This crap had been going on for years now. In the absence of any real progress, beater subculture had become mired in bravado, bullshit, and pointless infighting. It was sad, really. My favorite message threads were those devoted to bashing the Sixers. Sixers was the derogatory... Wait, shouldn't we have... Whatever. Sixers was the derogatory nickname beaters had given to the employees of innovative online industries. IOI pronounced IO...
Dude, is this SAO?
this is better than SAO. IOI pronounced IOI was a global communications conglomerate and the world's largest internet service provider. A large portion of IOI's business centered around providing access to the Oasis and on selling goods and services inside it. For this reason, IOI had attempted several hostile takeovers of gregarious simulation systems, all of which had failed. Now they were trying to seize control of GSS by exploiting a loophole in Halliday's will. IOI had created a new department within the company that they called their oology division. Oology was originally defined as the science of studying birds' eggs, but in recent years it had taken on the second meaning, the science of searching for Halliday's Easter egg. What the hell is it? IOI's oology division had but one purpose: to win Halliday's contest and seize control of his fortune, his company, and the Oasis itself. Sorry. Like most beaters, I was horrified at the thought of IOI taking control of the Oasis. The company's PR machine had made its intentions crystal clear. IOI believed that Halliday never properly monetized his creation, and they wanted to remedy that. They would start charging a monthly fee for access to the simulation. They would plaster advertisements on every visible surface. User anonymity, and free speech would become things of the past. The moment IOI took over, the Oasis would cease to be the open source virtual utopia I'd grown up in. It would become a corpo-run dystopia, an overpriced theme park for wealthy elitists. IOI required its egg hunters, which it referred to as oologists, to use their employee numbers as their Oasis avatar names. These numbers were all 6 digits in length, and they also began with the numeral 6, so everyone began calling them the Sixers. These days, most beaters refer to them as the Suxors, because they sucked. The Suxors.
My brain's bleeding.
Good. There's still more. There's still more to come. There's still more.
This
There's
is what we were
still.
supposed to be reading in high school.
The fact that he had to put in the fucking brackets because,
Because they
suck.
sucked. Oh man. To become a Sixer, you had to sign a contract stipulating, among other things, that if you found Halliday's egg, the prize would become the sole property of your employer. In return, IOI gave you a bi-monthly paycheck, food, lodging, healthcare benefits, and a retirement plan. The company also provided your avatar with high-end armor, vehicles, and weapons, and covered all of your teleportation fares. Joining the Sixers was a lot like joining the military. Sixers weren't hard to spot because they all looked identical. They were all required to use the same hulking male avatar, regardless of the operator's true gender, with close-cropped dark hair and facial features left at the system default settings. And they all wore the same navy blue uniform. The only way to tell these corporate drones apart was by checking the 6-digit employee number stamped on their right breast, just beneath the IOI corporate logo. Like most beaters, I loathed the Sixers and was disgusted by their very existence. By hiring an army of contract egg hunters, IOI was perverting the entire spirit of the contest. Of course, it could be argued that all the beaters who had joined clans were doing the same thing. There were now hundreds of beater clans, some with thousands of members, all working together to find the egg. Each clan was bound by an ironclad legal agreement stating that if one clan member won the contest, all members would share the prize. Solos like me didn't care much for the clans either, but we still respected them as fellow beaters, unlike the Sixers, whose goal was to hand the Oasis over to an evil multinational conglomerate intent on ruining it. My generation had never known a world without the Oasis. To us, it was much more than a game or an entertainment platform. It had been an integral part of our lives for as far back as we could remember. We'd been born into an ugly world, and the Oasis was our one happy refuge. The thought of the simulation being privatized and homogenized by IOI horrified us in a way that those born before its introduction found difficult to understand. For us, it was like someone It was like someone threatening to take away the sun or charge a fee to look up at the sky. The Sixers gave beaters a common enemy, and Sixer bashing was a favorite pastime in our forums and chat rooms. A lot of high-level beaters had a strict policy of killing or trying to kill every Sixer who crossed their path. Several websites were devoted to tracking Sixer activities and movements, and some beaters spent more time hunting the Sixers than they did searching for the egg. The bigger clans actually held a yearly competition called 86 the Suxors, with a prize for the clan who managed to kill the largest number of them. After checking a few other beater forums, I tapped a bookmark icon for one of my favorite websites, Artie's Missives, the blog of a female beater named Artemis, pronounced Artemis. I discovered it about 3 years ago and had been a loyal reader ever since. She posted these great, rambling essays about her search for Halliday's egg, which she calls a maddening MacGuffin hunt. She wrote with an endearing, intelligent voice, and her entries were filled with self-deprecating humor and witty, sardonic asides. I can't say R3 Miss, guys. Come on. Guys, come on. I can't say that.
Do it, nerd.
I can't.
Fish.
In addition to posting her often hysterical interpretations of passages in the almanac, she also linked to the books, movies, TV shows, and music she was currently studying as part of her Halliday research. I assume that all of these posts were filled with misdirection and misinformation, but they were still highly entertaining. It probably goes without saying that I had a massive cyber crush on R3 Miss. She occasionally posted screenshots of her raven-haired avatar, and I sometimes, always, save them to a folder on my hard drive. Her avatar had a pretty face, but it wasn't unnaturally perfect. In the Oasis, you got used to seeing freakishly beautiful faces on everyone, but R3 Miss's features didn't look as though they'd been selected from a beauty drop-down menu on some avatar creation template. Her face had the distinctive look of a real person's, as if her true features had been scanned in and mapped onto her avatar. Big hazel eyes, rounded cheekbones, a pointy chin, and a perpetual smirk. I found her unbearably attractive. R3 Miss's body was also somewhat unusual. In the Oasis, you usually saw one of two body shapes on female avatars, the absurdly thin yet widely popular supermodel frame, or the top-heavy, wasp-waisted, porn starlet physique, which looked even less natural in the Oasis than it did in the real world. But R3 Miss's frame was short, a Rubenesque, all curves. I knew the crush I had on R3 Miss was both silly and ill-advised. What did I really know about her? She never revealed her true identity, of course. Or her age or location in real life. In the real world, there was no telling what she really looked like. She could be 15 or 50. A lot of beaters even questioned whether she was really female. But I wasn't one of them. Probably because I couldn't bear the idea that the girl with whom I was virtually smitten might actually be some middle-aged dude named Chuck with back hair and male pattern baldness. In the years since I first started reading Artie's missives, it'd become one of the most popular blogs on the internet, now logging several million hits a day, and R3 Miss was now something of a celebrity, at least in beater circles. But fame hadn't gotten to her head. Her writing was still as funny and self-deprecating as ever. Her newest blog post was titled The John Hughes Blues, and it was an in-depth treatise on her 6 favorite John Hughes teen movies, which she divided into 2 separate trilogies: the Dorky Girl Fantasies trilogy, 16 Candles, Pretty in Pink, and Some Kind of Wonderful, and the Dorky Boy Fantasies trilogy, The Breakfast Club, Weird Science, and Ferris Bueller's Day Off. Just as I had finished reading it, an instant message window popped up in my display. It was my best friend H. Okay, if you want to split hairs, he was my only friend, not counting Mrs. Gilmore. H. Top of the morning, amigo. Hola, compadre. What are you up to? Wait, I should probably read the names too, huh? Parzival. Just surfing the turf. You. H. Got the basement online. Come and hang out before school, fool. Parzival. Sweet. I'll be there in a sec. I closed the IM window and checked the time. I still had about half an hour until class started. I grinned and tapped the small door icon at the edge of my display, then selected H's chat room from my list of favorites. Part 3. People don't chat. Sure they chat like that. What are you talking about? The system verified.
Type like that?
Many such cases. Many such cases. Part 3. The system verified that I was on the chat room's access list and it allowed me to enter. My view of the classroom shrank from the limits of my peripheral vision to a small thumbnail window in the lower right of my display, allowing me to monitor what was in front of my avatar. The rest of my field of vision was now filled with the interior of H's chat room. My avatar appeared just inside the entrance, a door at the top of a carpeted staircase. The door didn't lead anywhere. It didn't even open. This was because the basement and its contents didn't exist as a part of the Oasis. Chat rooms were standalone simulations, temporary virtual spaces that avatars could access from anywhere in Oasis. My avatar wasn't actually in the chat room. It only appeared that way. Wade 3, or Parzival, was still sitting in my world history classroom with his eyes closed. Logging into a chat room was a little like being in two places at once. H had named his chat room the basement. He had programmed it to look like a large suburban rec room circa the late 1980s. Old movie and comic book posters covered the wood paneled walls. A vintage RCA television stood in the center of the room, hooked up to a Betamax VCR, a laser displayer, and several vintage video game consoles. Bookshelves lined the far wall, filled with role-playing game supplements and the back issues of Dragon magazine. Hosting a chat room this large wasn't cheap, but H could afford it. He made quite a bit of dough competing in televised PvP arena games after school and on the weekends. H was one of the highest ranked combatants in the Oasis, in both the Deathmatch and Capture the Flag leagues. He was even more famous than Arthremus. Over the past few years, the basement had become a highly exclusive hangout for elite beaters. H granted access only to the people he deems worthy, so being invited to hang out in the basement was a big honor, especially for a third level nobody like me. As I descended the staircase, I saw a few dozen other beaters milling around with avatars that varied wildly in appearance. There were humans, cyborgs, demons, dark elves, Vulcans, vampires. Most of them were gathered around the row of old arcade games against the wall. A few others stood by the ancient stereo, currently blasting the Wild Boys by Duran Duran, browsing through H's giant rack of vintage cassette tapes. H himself was sprawled on one of the chat room's three couches, which were arrayed in a U shape in front of the TV. H's avatar was a tall, broad-shouldered Caucasian male with dark hair and brown eyes. I'd asked him once if he looked anything like his avatar in real life, and he jokingly replied, "Yes, but in real life, I'm even more handsome." As I walked over, he glanced up from the Intellivision game he was playing. His distinctive Cheshire grin stretched from ear to ear. "Z!" he shouted. "What is up, amigo?" He stretched out his right hand and gave me 5 as I dropped onto the couch opposite him. H had started calling me Z shortly after I met him. He liked to give people single-letter nicknames. H pronounced his own avatar's name just like the letter H. What up, Humperdinck?" I said. This was a game we played. I was called him by some random H name like Harry, Hubert, Henry, or Hogan. I was making guesses at his real first name, which he'd once confided to me, began with the letter H. I'd known H for a little over 3 years. He was also a student on Ludus, a senior at OPS 1172, which was on the opposite side of the planet from my school. We met one weekend in a public beater chat room and hit it off immediately because we shared all the same interests, which is to say one interest, a total, all-consuming obsession with Halliday and his Easter egg. A few minutes into our first conversation, I knew H was the real deal, an elite beater with some serious mental kung fu. He had his 80s trivia down cold, not just the canon stuff either. He was a true Halliday scholar, and he'd apparently seen the same qualities in me because he'd given me his contact card and invited me to hang out in the basement whenever I wanted. He'd been my closest friend ever since. Over the years, a friendly rivalry had gradually developed between us. We did a lot of trash talking about which one of us would get his name up on the scoreboard first. We were constantly trying to out-geek each other with our knowledge of obscure beater trivia. Sometimes we even conducted our research together. This usually consisted of watching cheesy 80s movies and TV shows here in his chat room. We also played a lot of video games, of course. H and I wasted countless hours on two-player classics like Contra, Golden Axe, Heavy Barrel, Smash TV, and Ikari Warriors. Aside from yours truly, H was the best all-around gamer I'd ever encountered. We were evenly matched at most games, but he could trounce me at certain titles, especially anything in the first-person shooter genre. That was his area of expertise, after all. I don't know anything about who H was in the real world, but I got the sense his home life wasn't that great. Like me, he seemed to spend every waking moment logged into the Oasis, and even though we never met in person, he told me more than once that I was his best friend. So I assumed he was just as isolated and lonely as I was. So what did you do after you bailed last night? He asked, tossing me the other Intellivision controller. We'd hung out here in his chat room for a few hours the previous evening, watching old Japanese monster movies. Nada, I said. Went home, brushed up on a few classic coin-ops. Unnecessary. Yeah, but I was in that mood. I didn't ask him what he'd done the night before, and he didn't volunteer any details. I knew he'd probably gone to Gygax or somewhere equally awesome to speed run through a few quests and rack up some XPs. He just didn't want to rub it in. H could afford to spend a fair amount of time off-world, following up leads and searching for the copper key, but he never lorded this over me or ridiculed me for not having enough dough to teleport anywhere. And he never insulted me by offering to loan me a few credits. It was an unspoken rule among beaters. If you were a solo, you didn't want or need any help from anyone. Beaters who wanted help joined a clan, and H and I both agree that clans were for suckasses and posers. We both vowed to remain solos for life. We still occasionally had discussions about the egg, but these conversations were always closely guarded, and we were careful to avoid talking about specifics. After I beat H at 3 rounds of Tron Deadly Discs, he threw down his Intellivision controller in disgust and grabbed a magazine off the floor. It was an old issue of Starlog. I recognized Rutger Hauer on the cover in a Ladyhawk promotional photo. Starlog, eh? I said, nodding my approval. Yep. Downloaded every issue from the Hatcheries archive, still working my way through them. I was just reading this great piece on Ewoks, The Battle for Endor. Made for TV, released in 1985, I recited. Star Wars trivia was one of my specialties. Total garbage. A real low point in the history of the wars. Says you, assface, it has some great moments. No, I said, shaking my head. It doesn't. It's even worse than that first Ewok flick, Caravan of Courage. They should have called it Caravan of Suck. H rolled his eyes and went back to reading. He wasn't going to take the bait. I eyed the magazine's cover. Hey, can I look at that when you're done? We grinned. Why, so you can read the article on Ladyhawk? Maybe. Man, you just love that crap burger, don't you? Blow me, H. How many times have you seen that Sapfest? I know you've made me sit through it at least twice. He was baiting me now. He knew Ladyhawk was one of my guilty pleasures, and that I'd seen it over 24 times. I was doing you a favor by making you watch it, noob, I said. I shoved a new cartridge into the Intellivision console and started up a single-player game of Astro Smash. You'll thank me one day. Wait and see. Ladyhawk is canon. Canon was the term we used to classify any movie, book, game, song, or TV show of which Halliday was known to have been a fan. Surely you must be joking, H said. No, I'm not joking, and don't call me Shirley. He lowered the magazine and leaned forward. There is no way Halliday was a fan of Ladyhawk. I guarantee it. Where's your proof, dipshit? I asked. The man had taste. That's all the proof I need. Then please explain to me why he owned Laserdisc on both VHS and Laserdisc. A list of all the films in Halliday's collection at the time of his death was included in the appendices of Anorak's Almanac. We both had the list memorized. The guy was a billionaire. He owned millions of movies, most of which he probably never even watched. He had DVDs of Howard the Duck and Kroll, too. That doesn't mean he liked them, asshat. Sure as hell doesn't make them canon. It's not up for debate, Homer, I said. Ladyhawk is an 80s classic. It's fucking lame is what it is. The swords look like they were made of tinfoil, and that soundtrack is epically lame. Full of synthesizers and shit by the motherfucking Alan Parsons Project. Lame-a-rama beyond lame. Highlander 2 lame. Hey, I said. I feigned hurling my Intellivision controller at him. Now you're just being insulting. Lady Hawk's cast alone makes the film canon. Roy Batty, Ferris Bueller, and the dude who played Professor Falcon in War Games. I searched my memory for the actor's name. John Wood, reunited with Matthew Broderick. A real low point in both of their careers, he said, laughing. He loved arguing about old movies even more than I did. The other beaters in the chat room were now starting to form a small crowd around us to listen in. Our arguments were often high in entertainment value. You must be stoned, I shouted. Lady Hawk was directed by Richard fucking Donner. The Goonies? Superman the movie? You're saying that guy sucks? I don't care if Spielberg directed it. It's a chick flick disguised as a sword and sorcery picture. The only genre film with less balls is probably freaking Legend. Anyone who actually enjoys Lady Hawk is a bona fide USDA choice pussy. Laughter from the peanut gallery. I was actually getting a little pissed off now too. I was a big fan of Legend too, and H knew it. Oh, so I'm a pussy. You're the one with an Ewok fetish. I snatched the Starlog out of his hand and threw it against a Revenge of the Jedi poster on the wall. I suppose you think your extensive knowledge of Ewok culture is going to help you find the egg? Don't start on the Endorians again, man, he said, holding up an index finger. I've warned you, I will ban your ass, I swear. I knew this was a hollow threat, so I was about to push the Ewok thing even further. Maybe give them some crap for referring to them as Endorians. But just then, a new arrival materialized on the staircase. A total lamer by the name of Iraq. Okay, I can't actually say R0K, guys, come on. Iraq. No, Melon, I can't say that either. I let out a groan. Iraq and H attended the same school and had a few classes together, but I still couldn't figure out why H had granted him access to the basement. Iraq fancied himself an elite beater, but he was nothing but an obnoxious poser. Phonetically. Sure, he did a lot of teleporting around the Oasis, completing quests, leveling up his avatar, but he didn't actually know anything. And he was always brandishing an oversized plasma rifle the size of a snowmobile. Even in the chat rooms where it was totally pointless, that guy had no sense of decorum. Are you cocks arguing about Star Wars again? He said, descending the steps and walking over to join the crowd around us. That shit? So played out, yo. I turned to H. If you want to ban someone, why don't you start with this clown? I hit reset on the Intellivision and started another game. Shut your hole, Penisville, Iraq replied, using his favorite pronunciation of my avatar's name. He doesn't ban me because he knows I'm elite. Ain't that right, H? No, H said, that ain't right. You're about as elite as my great-grandmother, and she's dead. Screw you, H, and your dead grandma. Gee, Iraq, I muttered, you always manage to elevate the intelligence level of the conversation. The whole room just lights up the moment you arrive. Oh, so sorry to upset you, Captain No Credits, Iraq said. Hey, shouldn't you be on Incipio panhandling for change right now? He reached for the second Intellivision controller, but I snatched it up, tossed it to H. He scowled at me. Prick, poser, poser, poser. Penisville is calling me a poser? He turned to address the small crowd. This chump so broke he has to bum rides to Greyhawk just so he can kill kobolds for copper pieces, and he's calling me a poser? This elicited a few snickers from the crowd, and I felt my face turn red under my visor. Once, about a year ago, I had made the mistake of hitching a ride off-world with Iraq to try and gain a few experience points. After dropping me in a low-level quest area in Greyhawk, the jerk had followed me. I had spent the next few hours slaying a small band of kobolds, waiting for them to respawn, and then slaying them again, over and over. My avatar was still only first level at the time, and it was one of the only safe ways for me to level up. Iraq had taken several screenshots of my avatar that night and labeled them Penisville, the mighty Kobold Slayer. Then he posted them to the hatchery. He still brought up every chance he got. He was never gonna let me live it down. That's right. I called you a poser. Poser. I stood up and got in his grill. You're an ignorant, know-nothing twink. Just because you're 14th level doesn't make you a beater. You actually have to possess some knowledge. Word, H said, nodding his agreement. We bumped fists. More snickering from the crowd, now directed at Iraq. Iraq glared at us for a moment. Okay, let's see who the real poser is, he said. Check this out, girls. Grinning, he produced an item from his inventory and held it up. It was an old Atari 2600 game, still in the box. He purposely covered the game's title with his hand, but I recognized the cover artwork anyway. It was a painting of a young man and woman in ancient Greek attire, both brandishing swords. Lurking behind them were a minotaur and a bearded guy with an eye patch. Know what this is, hotshot? Iraq said, challenging me. I'll even give you a clue. It's an Atari game, released as part of a contest. It contains several puzzles, and if you solve them, you could win a prize. Sound familiar? Iraq was always trying to impress us with some clue or piece of Halliday lore he foolishly believed he'd been the first to uncover. Beaters love to play a game of one-upmanship, and were constantly trying to prove they had acquired more obscure knowledge than everyone else. But Iraq totally sucked at it. You're joking, right? I said, you just now discovered the Sword Quest series? Iraq deflated. You're holding Sword Quest Earthworld, I continued. The first game in the Sword Quest series, released in 1982. I smiled. Why? Can you name the next 3 games in the series? His eyes narrowed. He was, of course, stumped. Like I said, he was a total poser. Anyone else? I said, opening the question up to the floor. The beaters in the crowd eyed each other, but no one spoke up. Fireworld, Waterworld, and Airworld, H answered. Bingo, I said, and we bumped fists again. Although Airworld was never actually finished because Atari fell into hard times and canceled the contest before it was completed. Iraq quietly put the game box back in his inventory. You should join up with the Sucksores, Iraq, H said, laughing. They could really use someone with your vast source of knowledge. Iraq flipped in the bird. If you two... Whoa, I can't say that! I can't say that on stream! I can't say that on stream!
Oh boy, I can't believe we're gonna get Tuna canceled.
What
Like,
the
legit canceled.
fuck?
Oh. Oh.
Oh, wait. Oh. Come on, Iraq, H said, shaking his head. Sword Quest Earthworld was Atari's unofficial sequel to Adventure. Every beater worth their salt knows about that contest. How much more obvious can you get? Iraq tried to save some face. Okay, so if you're such both experts, who programmed all the Sword Quest games? Dan Hitchens and Todd Fry, I recited. Try asking something difficult. I got one for you, H interjected. What were the prizes Atari gave out to the winner of each contest? Ah, I said. Good one. Let's see. The prize for the Earthworld contest was the Talisman of Penultimate Truth. It was solid gold encrusted with diamonds. The kid who won it melted it down to paid for college, as I recall. Yeah, H prodded. Quit stalling. What about the other 2? I'm not stalling. The Fireworld prize was the Chalice of Light, and the Waterworld prize was supposed to be the Crown of Life, but it was never awarded due to the cancellation of the contest. Same goes for the Airworld prize, which was supposed to be a Philosopher's Stone. H grinned, gave me a double high five, then added, and if the contest hadn't been cancelled, the winners of the first 4 rounds would have competed for the grand prize, the Sword of Ultimate Sorcery. I nodded. The prizes were all mentioned in the Sword Quest comic books that came with the games, comic books which happened to be visible in the treasure room in the final scene of Anorak's invitation, by the way. The crowd burst into applause. Iraq lowered his head in shame. Since I'd become a beater, it'd been obvious to me that Halliday had drawn inspiration for his contest from the Sword Quest contest. I had no idea if he had borrowed any of the puzzles from them too, but I'd studied the games and their solutions thoroughly just to be safe. Fine, you win, Iraq said, but you both obviously need to get a life. And you, I said, obviously need to find a new hobby, because you clearly lack the intelligence and commitment to be a beater. No doubt, H said. Try doing some research for a change, Iraq. I mean, did you ever hear of Wikipedia? It's free, douchebag. Iraq turned and walked over to the long boxes of comic books stacked on the other side of the room as if he'd lost interest in the discussion. Whatever, he said over his shoulder. If I didn't spend so much time offline getting laid, I'd probably know just as much worthless shit as you two do. H ignored him, turned back to me. What are the names of the twins who appeared in the Sword Quest comic books? Tara and Tor. Damn, Z, you are the man! Thanks, H. A message flashed on my display, informing me that the 3-minute warning bell had just rung in my classroom. I knew H and Iraq were seeing the same warning because our schools operated on the same schedule. Time for another day of higher learning, H said, standing up. Drag, Iraq said. See you losers later. He gave me the finger. Then his avatar disappeared as he logged out of the chat room. The other beaters began to log on and vanish too, until only H and I remained. Seriously, H, I said, why do you let that moron hang out here? Because he's fun to beat at video games, and his ignorance gives me hope. How so? Because if most of the other beaters out there were as clueless as Iraq, and they are, Z, believe me, that means you and I really do have a shot at the contest. I shrugged. I guess that's one way to look at it. Want to hang out after school again tonight? Around 7 or so? I've got a few errands to run, but then I'm going to tackle some of the stuff on my need-to-watch list. A space marathon, perhaps? Oh, hell yes, I said. Count me in! We logged out simultaneously just as the final bell began to ring. I'm probably gonna need some water after this chapter.
I'm gonna hop out because it's 1 a.m. here.
Okay.
But
Bye,
thank
bye.
you, Tuna.
Alright, peace.
Later.
My avatar's eyes slid open, and I was back in my world history classroom. The seats around me were now filled with other students, and our teacher, Mr. Ivanovich, was materializing at the front of the classroom. Mr. A's avatar looked like a portly, bearded college professor. He sported an infectious grin, wire wrist spectacles, and a tweed jacket with patches on the elbows. When he spoke, he somehow always managed to sound like he was reading a passage from Dickens. I liked him. He was a good teacher. Of course, we didn't know who Mr. Ivanovich really was or where he lived. We didn't know his real name or even if he really was a man. For all we knew, he could have been a small Inuit woman living in Anchorage, Alaska, who had adopted this appearance and voice to make her students more receptive to her lessons. But for some reason, I suspected Mr. Ivanovich's avatar looked and sounded just like the person operating it. All of my teachers are pretty great. Unlike their real-world counterparts, most of the Oasis public school teachers seem to genuinely enjoy their job, probably because they didn't have to spend half their time acting as babysitters and disciplinarians. The Oasis software took care of that, ensuring that students remained quiet and in their seats. All the teachers had to do was teach. It was also a lot easier for online teachers to hold their students' attention, because here in the Oasis, classrooms were like holodecks. Teachers could take their students on a virtual field trip every day without ever leaving the school grounds. During our world history lesson that morning, Mr. Ivanovich loaded up a standalone simulation so that our class could witness the discovery of King Tut's tomb by archaeologists in Egypt in AD 1922. The day before, we'd visited the same spot in 1334 BC and seen Tutankhamun's empire in all its glory. In my next class, biology, we traveled through a human heart and watched it pumping from the inside, just like in that old movie, Fantastic Voyage. In art class, we toured the Louvre while all of our avatars wore silly berets. In my astronomy class, we visited each of Jupiter's moons. We stood on the volcanic surface of Io while our teacher explained how the moon was originally formed. As our teacher spoke to us, Jupiter loomed behind her, filling half the sky, its great red splot churning slowly just over her left shoulder. Then she snapped her fingers, and we were standing on Europa, discussing the possibility of extraterrestrial life beneath the moon's icy crust. Oh, is it? Man. I blame the Japanese. Io, pronounce I-O. I spent my lunch period sitting in one of the green fields bordering the school, staring at the simulated scenery while I munched on a protein bar with my visor on. It beat staring at the inside of my hideout. I was a senior, so I was allowed to go off-world during lunch if I wanted to, but I didn't have that kind of spare dough to blow. Logging into the Oasis was free, but traveling around inside wasn't. Most of the time, I didn't have enough credits to teleport off-world and get back to Ludus. When the last bell rang each day, the students who had things to do in the real world would log out of the Oasis and vanish. Everyone else would head off-world. A lot of kids owned their own interplanetary vehicles. School parking lots all over Ludus were filled with UFOs, TIE fighters, old NASA space shuttles, Vipers from Battlestar Galactica, and other spacecraft designs lifted from every sci-fi movie and TV show you can think of. Every afternoon, I would stand on the school's front lawn and watch with envy as these ships filled the sky, zooming off to explore the simulation's endless possibilities. The kids who didn't own ships would either hitch a ride with a friend or stampede to the nearest transport terminal, headed for some off-world dance club, gaming arena, or rock concert. But not me. I wasn't going anywhere. I was stranded on Ludus, the most boring planet in the entire Oasis. The ontologically anthropocentric sensory immersive simulation was a big place. When the Oasis had first launched, it contained only a few hundred planets for users to explore, all created by GSS programmers and artists. Their environments rang the gamut, from sword and sorcery settings to cyberpunk-themed planet-wide cities to irradiated post-apocalyptic zombie-infested wastelands. Some planets were designed with painstaking details. Others were randomly generated from a series of templates. Each one was populated with a variety of artificially intelligent NPCs, non-player characters, computer-controlled humans, animals, monsters, aliens, androids with which Oasis users could interact. GSS had also licensed pre-existing virtual worlds from their competitors, so content that had been created for games like EverQuest and World of Warcraft were ported over to the Oasis, and copies of Norath and Azeroth were added to the growing catalog of Oasis planets. Other virtual worlds soon followed suit, from the Metaverse to the Matrix. The Firefly universe was anchored in a sector adjacent to the Star Wars galaxy, with a detailed recreation of the Star Trek universe in the sector adjacent to that. Users could now teleport back and forth between their favorite fictional worlds: Middle-earth, Vulcan, Pern, Arrakis, Magrathia, Discworld, Midworld, Riverworld, Ringworld, worlds upon worlds! For the sake of zoning and navigation, the Oasis had been divided equally into 27 cube-shaped sectors, each containing hundreds of different planets. The three-dimensional map of all 27 sectors distinctly resembled an 80s puzzle toy called a Rubik's Cube. like most beaters, I knew this was no coincidence. Each sector measured exactly 10 light hours across, or about 10.8 billion kilometers. So if you were traveling at the speed of light, the fastest speed attainable by any spacecraft inside the Oasis, you could get from one side of a sector to the other in exactly 10 hours. That sort of long distance travel wasn't cheap. Spacecraft that could travel at light speed were rare, and they required fuel to operate. Charging people for virtual fuel to power their virtual spaceships was one of the ways gregarious simulation systems generated revenue, since accessing the Oasis was free, but GSS's primary source of income came from teleportation fares. Teleportation was the fastest way to travel, but it was also the most expensive. Traveling around the Oasis wasn't just costly, it was also dangerous. Each sector was divided up into many different zones that varied in size and shape. Some zones were so large that they encompassed several planets, while others covered only a few kilometers on the surface of a single world. Each zone had a unique combination of rules and parameters. Magic would function in some zones and not in others. The same was true of technology. If you flew your technology-based starship into a zone where technology didn't function, your engines would fail the moment you crossed the zone border. Then you'd have to hire some silly gray-bearded sorcerer with a spell-powered space barge to tow your ass back into a technology zone. Is that a reference to something, actually? No, it's not a reference, because otherwise he would have just told us what it was. Dual zones permitted the use of both magic and technology, and null zones didn't allow either. There were pacifist zones where no player versus player combat was allowed, and player versus player zones where it was every avatar for themselves. You had to be careful whenever you entered a new zone or sector. You had to be prepared. But like I said, I didn't have that problem. I was stuck. At school. Ludus had been designed as a place of learning, so the planet had been created without a single quest portal or gaming zone anywhere on its surface. The only thing to be found here was thousands of identical school campuses separated by rolling green fields, perfectly landscaped parks, rivers, meadows, and sprawling template-generated forests. There were no castles, dungeons, or orbiting space fortresses for my avatar to raid. There were no NPC villains, monsters, or aliens for me to fight, so there was no treasure or magic items for me to plunder. This totally sucked for a lot of reasons. Completing quests, fighting NPCs, and gathering treasure were the only ways a low-level avatar like mine could earn experience points, XPs. Earning XPs was how you increase your avatar's power level, strength, and abilities. A lot of Oasis users didn't care about their avatar's power level or bother with the gaming aspects of the simulation at all. They only used the Oasis for entertainment, business, shopping, and hanging out with their friends. These users simply avoided entering any gaming or PvP zones where their defenseless first-level avatars could be attacked by NPCs or other players. If you stayed in safe zones like Ludus, you didn't have to worry about your avatar getting robbed, kidnapped, or killed. I hated being stuck in a safe zone. If I was going to find Halliday's egg, I knew I would eventually have to venture out in the dangerous sectors of the Oasis, and if I wasn't powerful or well armed enough to defend myself, I wasn't gonna stay alive for long. Over the past 5 years, I'd managed to slowly, gradually raise my avatar to the 3rd level. This hadn't been easy. I'd done it by hitching rides off-road with other students, mostly H, who happened to be headed a planet where my wuss avatar could survive. I'd have them drop me near a newbie-level gaming zone and spend the rest of the night or weekend slaying orcs, kobolds, or some other piddly class of monster that was too weak to kill me. For each NPC my avatar defeated, I would earn a few meager experience points and usually a handful of copper or silver coins dropped by my slain foes, which I used to pay the teleportation fare back to Ludus, often just before the final school bell rang. Sometimes, but not often, one of the NPCs I killed would drop an item. That was how I obtained my avatar's sword, shield, and armor. Okay. As an aside, if he could farm enough money to pay back his school fare, right? Shouldn't he have been able to farm enough money for like a round trip? Like everybody saw that South Park episode with World of Warcraft, right? Where they grinded the boars until like level cap, right? This is worse balance than Sword Art Online, to be honest. I stopped hitching rides with H at the end of the previous school year. His avatar was now above 30th level, so he was almost always headed to a planet where I wasn't safe for my avatar. He was happy to drop me on some noob world along the way, but if I didn't earn enough credits to pay for my fare back to Ludus, I'd wind up missing school because I was stuck on some other planet. This was not an acceptable excuse. I now racked up enough unexcused absences that I was in danger of being expelled. If that happened, I would have to return my school-issued Oasis console and visor. Worse, I'd be transferred back to a school in the real world to finish my senior year there. I couldn't risk that. So these days, I rarely left Ludus at all. I was stuck here, stuck at 3rd level. Having a 3rd level avatar was a colossal embarrassment. None of the other beaters took you seriously unless you were at least 10th level. Even though I'd been a beater since day one, everyone still considered me a noob. It was beyond frustrating. In desperation, I tried to find a part-time after-school job. And just to try to earn some walking around money. I applied for dozens of tech support and programming jobs, mostly grunt construction work coding parts of Oasis malls and office buildings, but it was completely hopeless. Millions of college-educated adults couldn't get one of those jobs. The Great Recession was now entering its 3rd decade, and unemployment was still at a record high. Even the fast food joints in my neighborhood had a 2-year waiting list for job applicants, so I remained stuck at school. I felt like a kid standing in the world's greatest video arcade without any quarters, unable to do anything but walk around and watch the other kids play.
Must suck to be free to play.
Man. Alright, I need to get some water. My throat's killing me.
You're doing great, Tuna.
Okay. After lunch, I headed to my class. Advanced Oasis Studies. This was a senior year Wait, everyone's here, right? Okay. This was a senior year elective where you learned about the history of the Oasis and its creators. Talk about an easy A. For the past 5 years... For the past 5 years, I devoted all of my free time to learning as much as I possibly could about James Halliday. I'd exhaustively studied his life, accomplishments, and interests. Over a dozen different Halliday biographies had been published in the years since his death, and I'd read them all. Several documentary films had also been made about him, and I'd study those too. I'd studied every word Halliday had ever written, and I'd played every video game he'd ever made. I took notes, writing down every detail I thought might be related to the hunt. I kept everything in a notebook, which I started calling my Grail Diary after watching the third Indiana Jones film. The more I learned about Halliday's life, the more I'd grown to idolize him. He was a god among geeks, a nerd uber deity on the level of Gygax, Garriott, and Gates. He left home after high school with nothing but his wits and his imagination, and he used them to attain worldwide fame and amass a vast fortune. He created an entirely new reality that now provided an escape for most of humanity. And to top it all off, he turned his last will and testament into the greatest video game contest of all time. I spent most of my time in advanced OASIS studies annoying our teacher, Mr. Siders, by pointing out errors in our textbook and raising my hand to interject some relevant bit of Halliday trivia that I, and I alone, thought was interesting. After the first few weeks of class, Mr. Siders had stopped calling on me unless no one else knew the answer to his questions. Today, he was reading excerpts from The Eggman, a best-selling Halliday biography that I'd already read 4 times. During his lecture, I kept having to resist the urge to interrupt him and point out all of the really important details the book left out. Instead, I just made a mental note of each omission, and as Mr. Siders began to recount the circumstances of Halliday's childhood, I once again tried to glean whatever secrets I could from the strange way Halliday had lived his life, and from the odd clues about himself he'd chosen to leave behind. James Donovan was born June 12, 1972 in Middletown, Ohio. He was an only child. His father was an alcoholic machine operator, and his mother was a bipolar waitress. By all accounts, James was a bright boy, but socially inept. He had an extremely difficult time communicating with the people around him. Despite his obvious intelligence, he did poorly in school, mostly because most of his attention was focused on computers, comic books, sci-fi and fantasy novels, movies, and, above all else, video games. One day in junior high, Halliday was sitting alone in the cafeteria reading a Dungeons & Dragons player's handbook. The game fascinated him, but he never actually played it, because he never had any friends to play it with. A boy in his class named Ogden Morrow noticed what Halliday was reading and invited him to attend one of the weekly D&D gaming sessions held at his house. There, in Morrow's basement, Halliday was introduced to an entire group of mega geeks just like himself. They immediately accepted him as one of their own, and for the first time in his life, James Halliday had a circle of friends. Ogden Morrow eventually became Halliday's business partner, collaborator, and best friend. Many would later liken the pairing of Morrow and Halliday to that of Jobs and Wozniak, or Lennon and McCartney. It was a partnership destined to alter the course of human history. At the age of 15, Halliday created his first video game, Anorak's Quest. He programmed it in BASIC and on a TRS-80 color computer he'd received the previous Christmas, though he'd asked his parents for the slightly more expensive Commodore 64. Anorak's Quest was an adventure game set in Chthoniya, the fantasy world Halliday had created for his high school Dungeons & Dragons campaign. Anorak was a nickname Halliday had been given by a female British exchange student at his school. He liked the name Anorak so much that he used it for his favorite D&D character, the powerful wizard who later appeared in many of his video games. Halliday created Anorak's Quest for fun, to share with the guys in his D&D gaming group. They all found the game addictive, lost countless hours attempting to solve its intricate riddles and puzzles. Ogden Morrow convinced Halliday that Anorak's Quest was better than most of the computer games currently on the market and encouraged him to try selling it. He helped Halliday create some simple cover artwork for the game, and together, the two of them hand-copied Anorak's Quest onto dozens of 5/4-inch floppy disks and stuck them into Ziploc bags along with a single photocopied sheet of instructions. They began selling the game on the software rack at their local computer store. Before long, they couldn't make copies fast enough to meet the demand. Morrow and Halliday decided to start their own video game company, Gregarious Games, which initially operated out of Morrow's basement. Halliday programmed new versions of Anorak's Quest for the Atari 800 XL, Apple II, and Commodore 64 computers, and Morrow began placing ads for the game in the back of several computer magazines. Within 6 months, Anorak's Quest became a national bestseller. Halliday and Morrow almost didn't graduate from high school because they spent most of their senior year working on Anorak's Quest 2. And instead of going off to college, they both focused all their energy on their new company, which had now grown too large for Morrow's basement. In 1990, Gregarious Games moved into its first real office located in a rundown strip mall in Columbus, Ohio. Over the next decade, the small company took the video game industry by storm, releasing a series of best-selling action and adventure games, all using a groundbreaking first-person graphics engine created by Halliday. Gregarious Games set a new standard for immersive gaming, and every time they released a new title, it pushed the envelope of what seemed to be possible on the computer hardware available at the time. The rotund Ogden Morrow was naturally charismatic, and he handled all of the company's business affairs and public relations. At every Gregarious Games press conference, Morrow grinned infectiously from behind his unruly beard and wire-rimmed spectacles, using his natural gift for hype and hyperbole. Halliday seemed to be Morrow's polar opposite in every way. He was tall, gaunt, painfully shy, and he preferred to stay out of the limelight. People employed by Gregarious Games during this period say that Halliday frequently locked himself in his office, where he programmed incessantly, often going without food, sleep, or human contact for days, even weeks. On the few occasions that Halliday agreed to do interviews, his behavior came off as bizarre, even by game designer standards. He was hyperkinetic, aloof, and so socially inept that the interviewers often came away with the impression that he was mentally ill. Halliday tended to speak so rapidly that his words were often unintelligible, and he had a disturbing, high-pitched laugh. Made even more so because he was usually the only one who knew what he was laughing about. When Halliday got bored during an interview or conversation, he would usually get up and walk out without saying a word. Halliday had many well-known obsessions. Chief among them were classic video games, sci-fi and fantasy novels, and movies of all genres. He also had an extreme fixation on the 1980s, the decade during which he'd been a teenager. Halliday seemed to expect everyone around him to share his obsessions, and he often lashed out at those who didn't. He was known to fire longtime employees for not recognizing an obscure line of movie dialogue he quoted, or if he discovered they weren't familiar with one of his favorite cartoons. Wait, one of his favorite cartoons, comic books, or video games. Ogden Morrow would always hire the employee back, usually without Halliday ever noticing. As the years went on, Halliday's already stunted social skills seemed to deteriorate even further. Several exhaustive psychological studies were done on Halliday following his death, and his obsessive adherence to routine and preoccupation with a few obscure areas of interest led many psychologists to conclude that Halliday had suffered from Asperger's syndrome or from some other form of high functioning autism. Despite his eccentricities, no one ever questioned Halliday's genius. The games he created were addictive and wildly popular. By the end of the 20th century, Halliday was widely recognized as the greatest video game designer of his generation, and some would argue, of all time. Ogden Morrow was a brilliant programmer in his own right, but his true talent was his knack for business. In addition to collaborating on the company's games, he masterminded all of their early marketing campaigns and shareware distribution schemes with astounding results. When Gregarious Games finally went public, their stock immediately shot into the stratosphere. By their 30th birthday, Halliday and Morrow were both multi-millionaires. They purchased mansions on the same street. Morrow bought a Lamborghini, took several long vacations, and traveled the world. Halliday bought and restored one of the original DeLoreans used in the Back to the Future films, continued to spend nearly all of his time welded to a computer keyboard, and used his newfound wealth to amass what would eventually become the world's largest private collection of classic video games, Star Wars action figures, vintage lunchboxes, and comic books. Man, can you imagine a world where, like, gacha games never took off? Because this is the world. That universe never took off with gacha games. It's kind of bullshit. It really did. It really did save the world. At the height of its success, Gregarious Games appeared to fall dormant. Several years elapsed during which they released no new games. Morrow made cryptic announcements saying the company is working on an ambitious project that would move them in an entirely new direction. Rumors began to circulate that Gregarious Games was developing some sort of new computer game hardware, and that this secret project was rapidly exhausting the company's considerable financial resources. There were also indications that both Halliday and Morrow had invested most of their own personal fortunes into the game's new endeavor. Word began to spread that Gregarious Games was in danger of going bankrupt. Then, in December 2012, Gregarious Games rebranded itself as Gregarious Simulation Systems, and under this new banner, they launched their flagship product, the only product GSS would ever release, the Oasis, the ontologically anthropocentric sensory immersive simulation. The Oasis would ultimately change the way people around the world lived, worked, and communicated. It would transform entertainment, social network, even global politics. Even though it was initially marketed as a new kind of massively multiplayer online game, the Oasis quickly evolved into a new way of life. In the days before the Oasis, massively multiplayer online games, MMOs, were among the first shared synthetic environments. They allowed thousands of players to simultaneously coexist inside a simulated world which they connected to via the internet. The overall size of these environments was relatively small, usually just a single world or a dozen or so small planets. MMO players could only see these online environments through a small two-dimensional window, their desktop computer monitor, and they could only interact with it using keyboards, mice, and other crude input devices. Gregarious Simulation Systems elevated the MMO concept to an entirely new level. The Oasis didn't limit its users to just one planet or even a dozen. The Oasis contained hundreds and eventually thousands of high-resolution 3D worlds for people to explore, and each one was beautifully rendered in meticulous graphical detail, right down to bugs and blades of grass, wind and weather patterns. Users could circumnavigate each of these planets and could never see the same terrain twice. Even in its first primitive incarnation, the scope of the simulation was staggering. Halliday Maru referred to the Oasis as an open source reality, a malleable online universe that anyone can access via the internet using their existing home computer or video game console. You could log in and instantly escape the drudgery of your day-to-day life. You could create an entirely new persona for yourself with complete control over how you looked and sounded to others. In the Oasis, the fat could become thin, the ugly could become beautiful, and the shy extroverted, or vice versa. You could change your name, age, sex, race, height, weight, voice, hair color, and bone structure. Or you could cease being human altogether and become an elf, ogre, alien, or any other creature from literature, movies, or mythology. So it's just Twitter. It's just Twitter. In the Oasis, you could become whomever and whatever you wanted to be without ever revealing your true identity, because your anonymity was guaranteed. Users could also alter the content of the virtual world via inside the Oasis or create entirely new ones. A person's online presence was no longer limited to a website or a social networking profile. In the Oasis, you could create your own private planet, build a virtual mansion in it, furnish and decorate it however you like, and invite a few thousand friends over for a party. And those friends could be in a dozen different time zones spread all over the globe. The keys to the success of the Oasis were the two new pieces of interface that GSS had created, both of which were required to access the simulations: the Oasis visor and the haptic gloves. The wireless one-size-fits-all Oasis visor was slightly larger than a pair of sunglasses. It used harmless, low-powered lasers to draw the stunningly real environment of the Oasis right onto its wearer's retinas, completely immersing their entire field of vision in the online world. The visor was light years ahead of the clunky virtual reality goggles available prior to that time, and it represented a paradigm shift in virtual reality technology, as did the lightweight Oasis haptic gloves, which allowed users to directly control the hands of their avatar and to interact with their simulated environment as if they were actually inside it. When you picked up objects, opened doors, or operated vehicles, the haptic gloves made you feel those non-existent objects and surfaces as if they were really right there in front of you. The gloves let you, as the television ads put it, reach in and touch the Oasis. Working together, the visor and the gloves made entering the Oasis an experience unlike anything else available, and once people got a taste of it, there was no going back. The software that powered the simulation, Halliday's new Oasis reality engine, also represented a huge technological breakthrough. It managed to overcome limitations that had plagued previous simulated realities. In addition to restricting the overall size of their virtual environments, earlier MMOs had been forced to limit their virtual populations, usually to a few thousand users per server. If too many people were logged in at the same time, the simulation would slow to a crawl and avatars would freeze in mid-stride as the system struggled to keep up. But the Oasis utilized a new kind of fault-tolerant server array that draw additional processing power from every computer connected to it. At the time of its initial launch, the Oasis could handle up to 5 million simultaneous users with no discernible latency and no chance of a system crash. He really doesn't understand how servers work, does he? He really doesn't know how they work. That's how this works, guys. Come on. Oh, man. Yeah, you just somehow draw processing power from your users, and that gives you your stability. That's impressive. It's really impressive. Less than FF14. At its start, it was up to 5 million. Yeah, because that's how folding at home works. One of the they just buy more computers themselves, to be honest? A massive marketing campaign promoted the launch of the Oasis. The pervasive television, billboard, and internet ads featured a lush green oasis, complete with palm trees and a pool of crystal blue water, surrounded on all sides by a vast, barren desert. GS's new endeavor was a massive success from day one. The Oasis was what people had been dreaming of for decades. The virtual reality they had been promised for so long was finally here, and it was even better than they had imagined. The Oasis was an online utopia, a holodeck for the home, and its best selling point? It was free. Most online games of the day generated revenue by charging users a monthly subscription fee for access. GSS only charged a one-time sign-up fee of 25 cents, for which you received a lifetime Oasis account. Hold on. 25 cents you get a new account? The ads all use the same tagline: The Oasis, it's the greatest video game ever created, and it only costs a quarter. At a time of drastic social and cultural upheaval, when most of the world's population longed for an escape from reality, the Oasis provided it in a form that was cheap, legal, safe, and not medically proven to be addictive. The ongoing energy crisis contributed greatly to the Oasis's runaway popularity. The skyrocketing cost of oil made airline and automobile travel too expensive for the average citizen, and the Oasis became the only getaway most people could afford. As the era of cheap, abundant energy drew to a close, poverty and unrest began to spread like a virus. Every day, more and more people had reason to seek solace inside Halliday and Morrow's virtual utopia. Any business that wanted to set up shop inside the Oasis had to rent or purchase virtual real estate, which Morrow dubbed surreal estate, from GSS. Anticipating this, the company had set aside Sector 1 as the simulation's designated business zone, and began to sell and rent millions of blocks of surreal estate there. City-sized shopping malls were erected in the blink of an eye, and storefronts spread across planets like time-lapse footage of mold devouring an orange. Urban development had never been so easy. In addition... Wait a minute. Oh, shit. Hold on a sec. In addition to the billions of dollars that GSS had raked in selling the land that didn't actually exist, they made a killing selling virtual objects and vehicles. The Oasis had become such an integral part of people's day-to-day social lives that users were more than willing to shell out real money to buy accessories for their avatars. Clothing, furniture... houses, flying cars, magic swords, and machine guns. These items were nothing but ones and zeros stored on the Oasis servers, but they were also status symbols. Most items only cost a few credits, but since they cost nothing for GSS to manufacture, it was all profit. Even in the throes of an ongoing economic recession, the Oasis allowed Americans to continue engaging in their favorite pastime, shopping. The Oasis quickly became the single most popular use for the internet, so much that the terms Oasis and internet gradually became synonymous, and the incredibly easy to use three-dimensional Oasis OS, which GSS gave away for free, became the single most popular computer operating system in the world. Before long, billions of people around the world were working and playing in the Oasis every day. Some of them met, fell in love, and got married without ever setting foot on the same continent. The lines of distinction between a person's real identity and that of their avatar began to blur. It was the dawn of a new era, one where most of the human race now spent most of their free time inside a video game. Wait, we just jumped from this entire monologue to like back to what the fuck is this? What is this?
What the
There was no
fuck?
transition. We're just back.
How is this published?
Didn't they make a movie out of it?
They made a movie out of it, yeah. The rest of my school day. it hasn't even begun, see. We haven't even gotten to the real painful parts.
It's 60 pages of literally nothing
Where-
happening.
we're a fifth of the way there, and literally nothing has happened. Literally nothing has happened. We just got a like background.
Just info dump.
I basically. This is.
Holy shit.
The rest of my school day passed quickly until my final class, Latin. Most students took a foreign language they might actually be able to use someday, like Mandarin.
That's funny.
Plus 100 social credit. Or Hindi. Or Spanish. I decided to take Latin because James Halliday had taken Latin. He'd occasionally use Latin words and phrases in his early adventure games. Unfortunately, even with the limitless possibilities of the Oasis at her disposal, my Latin teacher, Ms. Rank, still had a hard time making her lessons interesting. And today, she was reviewing a bunch of verbs I had already memorized, so I found my attention drifting almost immediately. While a class was in session, the simulation prevented students from accessing any data or programs that weren't authorized by their teacher to prevent kids from watching movies, playing games, or chatting with each other instead of paying attention to the lesson. Luckily, during my junior year, I discovered a bug in the school's online library software, and by exploiting it, I could access any book in the school's online library, including Anorak's Almanac. So whenever I got bored, like right now, I'd pull it up in a window on my display and read over my favorite passages to pass the time. Over the past 5 years, the Almanac had become my Bible. Like most books nowadays, it was only available in electronic format. But I'd wanted to be able to read the Almanac day or night, or even during one of the stack's frequent power outages, so I'd fixed up an old discarded laser printer and used it to print out a hard copy. I put it in an old 3-ring binder that I kept in my backpack and studied until I knew every word by heart. The Almanac contained thousands of references to Halliday's favorite books, TV shows, movies, songs, graphic novels, video games. Most of these items were over 40 years old, and so free digital copies of them could be downloaded from the Oasis. If there was something I needed that wasn't legally available for free, I could always get it by using GunTorrent. BeatTorrent, a file sharing program used by beaters around the world. No, my voice is fine. Oh, it's gonna be sore tomorrow morning. Tomorrow's gonna be kind of painful. I could hear it going hoarse too. That's kind of the problem too.
Do you want to stop here?
No. We can go for a couple more chapters probably.
What?
To read
It's
more
fun.
too.
A couple more chapters, he said.
We're gonna be done with the whole book by this rate. Oh, okay. I'll finish this chapter. And then we'll see how the next chapter is. And then we'll figure out from there.
I-
When it came to my research, I never took any shortcuts. Over the past 5 years, I'd worked my way down the entire recommended beta reading list. Douglas Adams, Kurt Vonnegut, Neil Stephenson, Richard K. Morgan, Stephen King, Orson Scott Card, Terry Pratchett, Terry Brooks, Bester, Bradbury, Haldeman, Heinlein, Tolkien, Vance, Gibson, Gaiman, Sterling, Moorcock, Scalzi, Zelazny. I read every novel by every single one of Halliday's favorite authors. And I didn't stop there. I also watched every single film he referenced in the almanac. If it was one of Halliday's favorites, like War Games, Ghostbusters, Real Genius, Better Off Dead, or Revenge of the Nerds, I rewatched it until I knew every scene by heart. I devoured each of what Halliday referred to as the Holy Trilogies: Star Wars, original and prequel trilogies in that order, Lord of the Rings, The Matrix, Mad Max, Back to the Future, and Indiana Jones. Halliday once said he preferred to pretend the other Indiana Jones films, from Kingdom of the Crystal Skull onward, didn't exist. I tended to agree. I also absorbed the complete filmographies of each of his favorite directors: Cameron, Gilliam, Jackson, Fincher, Kubrick, Lucas, Spielberg, Del Toro, Tarantino, and of course, Kevin Smith. I spent 3 months studying every John Hughes teen movie and memorizing all the key lines of dialogue. Only the meek get pinched, the bold survive. You could say I covered all the bases. I studied Monty Python, not just the Holy Grail either. Every single one of their films, albums, and books, and every episode of the original BBC series, including the 2 lost episodes they did for German television. I wasn't going to cut any corners. I was going to miss something obvious. Somewhere along the line, I started to go overboard. I may in fact have started to go a little insane. I watched every episode of The Greatest American Hero, Airwolf, The A-Team, Knight Rider, Misfits of Science, and The Muppet Show. What about The Simpsons, you ask? I knew more about Springfield than I knew about my own city. Star Trek? Oh, I did my homework. TOS, TNG, DS9, even Voyager and Enterprise. I watched them all in chronological order. The movies too. Phasers Locked on Target. I gave myself a crash course in 80s Saturday morning cartoons. I learned the name of every last goddamn GoBot and Transformer. Land Lost, Thundar the Barbarian, He-Man, Schoolhouse Rock, G.I. Joe. I knew them all because knowing is half the battle. Who was my friend when things got rough? HR Puffin stuff. Japan? Did I cover Japan? Yes! Yes indeed! Anime and live action, Godzilla, Gamera, Starblazer, Space Jets, G-Force, Go Speed Racer, go! I wasn't some dilettante. I wasn't screwing around. I memorized every last Bill Hicks stand-up routine. Music? Well, covering all the music wasn't easy. It took some time. The 80s was a long decade, 10 whole years, and Halliday didn't seem to have had very discerning taste. He listened to everything, so I did too. Pop, rock, new wave, punk, heavy metal, from the Police to Journey to R.E.M. to the Clash. I tackled it all. I burned through the entire They Might Be Giant discography in under 2 weeks. Devo took a little longer. I watched a lot of YouTube videos of cute, geeky girls playing 80s cover tunes on ukuleles. Technically, this wasn't part of my research, but I had a serious cute, geeky girls playing ukuleles fetish that I can neither explain nor defend. I memorized lyrics, silly lyrics by bands with names like Van Halen, Bon Jovi, Def Leppard, and Pink Floyd. I kept at it. I burned the Midnight Oil. Did you know that Midnight Oil was an Australian band with a 1987 hit titled Beds Are Burning? I was obsessed. I wouldn't quit. My grades suffered. I didn't care. I read every issue of every comic book title Halliday had ever collected. I wasn't going to have anyone questioning my commitment, especially when it came to the video games. Video games were my area of expertise, my double weapon specialization, my dream Jeopardy category. I downloaded every game mentioned or referenced in the almanac, from Akalebeth to Zaxxon. I played each title until I mastered it, then moved on to the next one. You'd be amazed how much research you can get done when you have no life whatsoever. 12 hours a day, 7 days a week is a lot of study time. I worked my way through every video game genre and platform. Classic arcade coin-ops, home computer, console and handheld, text-based adventure, first-person shooters, third-person RPGs, ancient 8, 16, and 32-bit classics written in the previous century. The harder a game was to beat, the more I enjoyed it. And as I played these ancient digital relics night after night, year after year, I discovered I had a talent for them. I could master most action titles in a few hours, and there wasn't an adventure or role-playing game I couldn't solve. I never need any walkthroughs or cheat codes, everything just clicked, and I was even better at the old arcade games. When I was in the zone on a high-speed classic like Defender, I felt like a hawk in flight, or the way I thought a shark must feel as it cruises the ocean floor. For the first time, I knew what it was to be a natural at something, to have a gift. But it wasn't my research into old movies, comics, or video games that had reeled in my first clue. That had come while I was studying the history of old pen and paper role-playing games. Was that a chapter close actually? Oh god, no, it's not. Oh man, wow, that was a segment to power through.
It's just schizo ranting to nobody.
It was actually a schizo rant. Reprinted on the first page of Anorak's Almanac were the 4 rhyming lines of verse Halliday had recited in the invitation video. 3 hidden keys open 3 secret gates, wherein the errant will be tested for worthy traits, and those with the skill to survive these straits will reach the end where the prize awaits. At first, this seemed to be the only direct reference to the contest in the entire almanac, but then, buried among all those rambling journal entries and essays on pop culture, I discovered a hidden message. Scattered throughout the text of the almanac were a series of marked letters. Each of these letters had a tiny, nearly invisible notch cut into its outline. I'd first noticed these notches the year after Halliday died. I was reading my hard copy of the almanac at the time, and so at first, I thought the notches were nothing but tiny printing imperfections, perhaps due to the paper or the ancient printer I'd used to print out the almanac. But when I checked the electronic version of the book available on Halliday's website, I found the same notches on the same exact letters. And if you zoomed in on one of those letters, the notches stood out plain as day. Halliday had put them there. He marked these letters for a reason. There turned out to be 112 of these notched letters scattered throughout the book. By writing them down in the order they appeared, I discovered they spelled something. I nearly died of excitement as I wrote it down in my Grail diary. The copper key awaits explorers in a tomb filled with horrors, but you have much to learn if you hope to earn a place among the high scorers. Other beaters had also discovered this hidden message, of course, but they were all wise enough to keep it to themselves. For a while, anyway. About 6 months after I discovered the hidden message, this loudmouth MIT freshman found it. His name was Steven Pendergast, and he decided to get his 15 minutes of fame by sharing his discovery with the media. The news feeds broadcast interviews with this moron for a month, even though he didn't have the first clue about the message's meaning. After that, going public with a clue became known as pulling a Pendergast. Once the message became public knowledge, beaters nicknamed it the Limerick. The entire world had known about it for almost 4 years now, but no one seemed to understand its true meaning, and the copper key still had yet to be found. I knew Halliday had frequently used similar riddles in many of his early adventure games, and each of those riddles had made sense in the context of its game. So I devoted an entire section of my Grail diary to deciphering the lyric line by line. The copper key awaits explorers. This line seemed pretty straightforward. No hidden meaning that I could detect. In a tomb filled with horrors. This line was trickier. Taken at face value, it seemed to say that the key was hidden in a tomb somewhere, one filled with horrifying stuff. But then, During the course of my research, I discovered an old Dungeons and Dragons supplement called Tomb of Horrors, which had been published in 1978. From the moment I saw the title, I was certain that the second line of the limerick was a reference to it. Halliday and Morrow had played Advanced Dungeons and Dragons all through high school, along with several other pen and paper role-playing games like GURPS, Champions, Car Wars, and Rollmaster. Tomb of Horrors was a thin booklet called a module. It contained detailed maps and room-by-room descriptions of an underground labyrinth infested with undead monsters. D&D players could explore the labyrinth with their characters as the Dungeon Master read from the module and guided them through the story it contained, describing everything they saw and encountered along the way. As I learned more about how these early role-playing games worked, I realized that a D&D module was the primitive equivalent of a quest in the Oasis, and D&D characters were just like the avatars. In a way, these old role-playing games had been the first virtual reality simulations created long before computers were powerful enough to do the job. In those days, if you wanted to escape to another world, you had to create it yourself using your brain, some paper, pencils, dice, and a few rulebooks. This realization kind of blew my mind. It changed my whole perspective on the hunt for Halliday's Easter egg. From then on, I began to think of the hunt as an elaborate D&D module, and Halliday was obviously the Dungeon Master, even if he was now controlling the game from beyond the grave. I found a digital copy. I found a digital copy of the 67-year-old Tomb of Horrors module buried deep in an ancient FTP archive. As I studied it, I began to develop a theory. Somewhere in the Oasis, Halliday had recreated the Tomb of Horrors, and he'd hidden the copper key inside it. I spent the next few months studying the module, memorizing all of its maps and room descriptions, in anticipation of the day I would finally figure out where it was located. But that was the rub. The limerick didn't appear to give any hint as to where Halliday had hidden the damn thing. The only clue seemed to be, you have much to learn if you hope to earn a place among the high scorers. There were literally thousands of worlds in the Oasis, and Halliday could have hidden his recreation of the Tomb of Horrors on any one of them. Searching every planet one by one would take forever, even if I had the means to do so. A planet named Gygax in Sector 2 seemed like the obvious place to start looking. Halliday had coded the planet himself, and he named it after Gary Gygax, one of the creators of Dungeons and Dragons and the author of the original Tomb of... the author of the original Tomb of Horrors module. According to Beaterpedia, a Beater wiki, the planet Gygax was covered with recreations of old D&D modules, but Tomb of Horrors was not one of them. There didn't appear to be a recreation of the tomb on any of the other D&D themed worlds in the Oasis either. Beaters had turned all those planets upside down. Had a recreation of the Tomb of Horrors been hidden on one of them, it would have been found and logged long ago. So the tomb had to be hidden somewhere else, and I didn't have the first clue where, but I told myself that if I just kept at it, kept doing research, I would eventually learn what I needed to know to figure out the tomb's hiding place. In fact, that was probably what Halliday meant by, you have much to learn if you hope to earn a place among the high scorers. If any other beaters out there shared my interpretation of the limericks, so far they'd been smart enough to keep quiet about it. I'd never seen any post about the Tomb of Horrors on any beater message boards. I realized, of course, that this might be because my theory about the old D&D module was completely lame and totally off base. So I continued to watch and learn and listen and study, preparing for the day when I finally stumbled across the clue that would lead me to the copper key. And then it finally happened. Right while I was sitting there, daydreaming in Latin class. Page 68 out of 376. We went through 68 pages of basically nothing. And now the story's finally actually gonna start.
Fucking dumb, actually.
Alright. This is the actual last chapter. We'll stop after this chapter.
I think I'm gonna call it a night here.
Oh.
You can
Well-
continue though. No, you can continue. Good luck. Good luck.
I'll do one more chapter.
Good luck. Good luck.
Our teacher, Ms. Rank, was sitting at the front of the class, slowly conjugating Latin verbs. She said them in English first, then in Latin, and each word automatically appeared on the board behind her as she spoke it. Whenever we were doing tedious verb conjugation, I always got the lyrics to an old Schoolhouse Rock song stuck in my head. To run, to go, to get, to give, verb. You're what's happening. I was quietly humming this tune to myself when Ms. Rank began to conjugate the Latin for the verb to learn. To learn. Desire, she said. Now, this one should be easy to remember because it's similar to the English word discern, which also means to learn. Hearing her repeat the phrase to learn was enough to make me think of the limerick. You have much to learn if you hope to earn a place among the high scorers. Ms. Rank continued, using the verb in a sentence. We go to school to learn, she said. Pedimus scolum ut literis discamus. And that was when it hit me. Like an anvil falling out of the sky directly onto my skull, I gazed around at my classmates. What group of people has much to learn? Students. High school students. I was on a planet filled with students, all of whom had much to learn. What if the limerick was saying that the tomb was hidden right here on Ludus, the very planet where I'd been twiddling my thumbs for the past 5 years? Then I remembered that Ludus was also a Latin word meaning school. I pulled up my Latin dictionary to double check the definition. That was when I discovered the word had more than one meaning. Ludus could mean school. But it could also mean sport or game. Game. Ow, my throat. I fell out of my folding chair and landed with a thud on the floor of my hideout. My Oasis console tracked this movement and attempted to make my avatar drop to the floor of my Latin classroom, but the classroom conduct software prevented it from moving, and a warning flashed on my display. Please remain seated during class. I told myself not to get too excited. I might be jumping to conclusions. There were hundreds of private schools and universities located on other planets inside the Oasis. The limerick might refer to one of them, but I didn't think so. Ludus made more sense. James Halliday had donated billions to fund the creation of the Oasis public school system here as a way to demonstrate the huge potential of the Oasis as an educational tool. And prior to his death, Halliday had set up a foundation to ensure that the Oasis public school system would always have the money it needed to operate. The Halliday Learning Foundation also provided impoverished children around the globe with free Oasis hardware and internet access so that they could attend school inside the Oasis. GSS's own programmers had designed and constructed Ludus and all the schools on it, so it was entirely possible that Halliday was the one who'd given the planet its name. And he would have had access to the planet's source code. If he'd wanted to hide something here. The realizations continue to detonate in my brain like atomic bombs going off, one after another. According to the original D&D module, the entrance to the Tomb of Horrors was hidden near a low, flat-topped hill about 200 yards wide and 300 yards long. The top of the hill was covered with large black stones that were arranged in such a way that if you viewed them from a great height, they resembled the eye sockets, nose holes, and teeth of a human skull. But if there was a hill like that somewhere on Ludus, wouldn't someone have stumbled across it by now? Maybe not. Ludus had hundreds of large forests scattered across all over its surface in the vast sections of empty land that stood between the thousands of school campuses. Some of the forests were enormous, covering dozens of square miles. Most students never even set foot inside them because there was nothing of interest to do or see there. Like its fields and rivers and lakes, Ludus's forests were just computer-generated landscaping placed there to fill up the empty space. Of course, during my avatar's long stay on Ludus, I'd explored a few of the forests within walking distance of the school out of boredom. But all they contained were thousands of randomly generated trees and the occasional bird, rabbit, or squirrels. These tiny creatures weren't worth any experience points that you killed them. I checked. So it was entirely possible that somewhere, hidden in one of Ludus's large unexplored patches of forestland, that there was a small stone-covered hill that resembled a human skull. I tried pulling up a map of Ludus on my display, but I couldn't. The system wouldn't let me because school was still in session. The hack I used to access books in the school's online library didn't work for the Oasis Atlas software. Shit! I blurted out in frustration. The classroom conduct software filtered this out, so neither Ms. Rank nor my classmates heard it, but another warning flashed on my display. Profanity muted. Misconduct warning. I looked at the time on my display. Exactly 17 minutes and 20 seconds left until the end of the school day. I sat there with clenched teeth and counted off each second, my mind still racing. Ludus was an inconspicuous world in Sector 1. There wasn't supposed to be anything but schools here, so this was the last place a beater would think to look for the copper key. It was definitely the last place I had ever thought to look, and that alone proved it was a perfect hiding place. But why would Halliday have chosen to hide the copper key here? Unless he'd wanted a school kid to find it. I was still reeling from the implications of that thought when the bell finally rang. Around me, the other students began to file out of the room or vanish in their seats. Ms. Rank's avatar also disappeared, and in a few moments, I was all alone in the classroom. I pulled up a map of Ludus on my display. It appeared as a three-dimensional globe floating in front of me, and I gave it a spin with my hand. Ludus was a relatively small planet by Oasis standards, about a third the size of Earth's moon, with a circumference of exactly 1,000 kilometers. There were no oceans, just a few large lakes placed here and there. Since Oasis planets weren't real, they didn't have to obey the laws of nature. On Ludus, it was perpetually daytime, regardless of where you stood on the surface, and the sky was always a perfect cloudless blue. The stationary sun that hung overhead was nothing but a virtual light source programmed into the imaginary sky. On the map, the school campuses reappeared as thousands of identical numbered rectangles dotting the planet's surface. They were separated by rolling green fields, rivers, mountain ranges, and forests. The forests were of all shapes and sizes. Many of them bordered one of the schools. Next to the map, I pulled up the Tomb of Horrors module. Near the front, it contained a crude illustration of the map concealing the tomb. I took a screenshot of this illustration and placed it in the corner of my display. I frantically searched my favorite wearer sites until I found a high-end image recognition plugin for the Oasis Atlas. Once I downloaded the software via BeaterNet, it took me a few more minutes to figure out how to make it scan the entire surface of Ludus for a hill with large black stones arranged in a skull-like pattern. One with a size, shape, and appearance that matched the illustration from the Tomb of Horrors module. After about 10 minutes of searching, the software highlighted a possible match. I held my breath as I placed a close-up image from the Ludus map beside the illustration from the D&D module. The shape of the hill and the skull pattern of the stones both matched the illustration perfectly. I decreased the magnification on the map a bit, then pulled back far enough to confirm that the northern edge of the hill ended in a cliff of sand and crumbling gravel, just like in the original Dungeons and Dragons module. I let out a triumphant yell that echoed in the empty classroom and bounced off the walls of my tiny hideout. I'd done it! I'd actually found the Tomb of Horrors! When I finally managed to calm down, I did some quick calculations. The hill was near the center of a large amoeba-shaped forest located on the opposite side of Ludus, over 400 kilometers from the school. My avatar could run at a maximum speed of 5 kilometers an hour, so it would take me over 3 days to get there on foot if I ran there non-stop. If I could teleport, I could be there within minutes. The fare wouldn't be much for such a short distance, maybe a few hundred credits. Unfortunately, that was still more than my current Oasis balance, which was a big, fat 0. I considered my options. H would lend me the money for the fare, but I didn't want to ask for his help. If I couldn't reach the tomb on my own, I didn't deserve to reach it at all. Besides, I'd have to lie to H about what the money was for, and since I never asked him for a loan before, any excuse I gave would make him suspicious. Thinking about H, I couldn't help but smile. He was really going to freak out when he found out about this. The tomb was hidden less than 70 kilometers from his school, practically his backyard. That thought triggered an idea, one that made me leap to my feet. I ran out of the classroom and down the hall. Not only had I figured out a way to teleport to the other side of Ludus, I knew how to get my school to pay for it. Each Oasis public school had a bunch of different athletic teams, including wrestling, soccer, football, baseball, volleyball, and a few other sports that couldn't be played in the real world, like Quidditch and Zero Gravity Capture the Flag. Students went out for these teams just like they did at schools in the real world, and they played using elaborate sports-capable haptic rigs that required them to actually do all their own running, jumping, kicking, tackling, and so on. The teams had nightly practices, held pep rallies, and traveled to other schools on Ludus to compete against them. Our school gave out free teleportation vouchers to any student who wanted to attend an away game, so we could sit up in the stands and root for old OPS 1873. I'd only taken advantage of this once when our Capture the Flag team had played against HS School in the OPS Championships. When I arrived in the school office, I scanned the activity schedule, found what I was looking for right away. That evening, our football team was playing an away game against OPS number 0571, which was located at roughly an hour's run from the forest where the tomb was hidden. I reached out and selected the game, and a teleportation voucher instantly appeared in my avatar's inventory. Good for one free round trip to OPS 0571. I stopped at my locker long enough to drop off my textbooks and grab my flashlight, sword, shield, and armor. Then I sprinted out the front entrance and I crossed the expansive green lawn in front of the school. When I reached the red borderline that marked the edge of the school grounds, I glanced around to make sure no one was watching me, then stepped across the line. As I did, the Wade 3 name tag floating above my head changed to read Parzival. Now that I was off school grounds, I could use my avatar name once again. I could also turn off my name tag completely, which was what I did now because I wanted to travel incognito. The nearest transport terminal was a short walk from the school at the end of a cobblestone path. It was a large domed pavilion supported by a dozen ivory pillars. Each pillar bore an Oasis teleportation icon, the capital T in the center of a blue hexagon. School had only been out for a few minutes now, so there was a steady stream of avatars filing into the terminal. Inside were long rows of blue teleportation booths. Their shape and color always reminded me of Doctor Who's TARDIS. I stepped into the first empty booth I saw, and the doors closed automatically. I didn't need to enter my destination on the touch screen because it was already encoded on my voucher. I just slid the voucher into a slot, and a world map of Ludus appeared on the screen, showing a line from my present location to my destination, a flashing green dot next to OPS 0571. The booth instantly calculated the distance I would be traveling, 462 kilometers, and the amount my school would be invoiced for the fare, 103 credits. The voucher was verified, and the fare showed as paid, and my avatar vanished. I instantly reappeared in an identical booth inside an identical transport terminal on the opposite side of the planet. As I ran outside, I spotted OPS 0571 off to the south. It looked exactly like my school, except the surrounding landscape was different. I spotted some students from my school walking toward the nearby football stadium on their way to watch the game and root for our team. I wasn't sure why they bothered. They could have just as easily watched the game via vid feed. And any empty seats in the stands would be filled with randomly generated NPC fans who would wolf down virtual sodas and hot dogs while cheering wildly. Occasionally, they would even do the wave. I was already running in the opposite direction across a rolling green field that stretched out behind the school. A small mountain range loomed in the distance, and I could see the amoeba-shaped forest at its base. I turned on my avatar's auto run feature, then opened my inventory and selected 3 of my items listed there. My armor appeared on my body, my shield appeared in a sling on my back, and my sword appeared in its scabbard, hanging at my side. I was almost to the edge of the forest when my phone rang. The ID said it was H, probably calling to see why I hadn't logged into the basement yet. But if I answered the call, he would see a live video feed of my avatar running across a field at top speed, with OPS 0571 shrinking in the distance behind me. I could conceal my current location by taking the call as audio only, but that might make him suspicious. So I let the call roll to my vid mail. H's face appeared in a small window on my display. He was calling from a PvP arena somewhere. Dozens of avatars were locked in fierce combat on a multi-tiered playing field behind him. Yo, Z, what are you up to? Jerking off to Lady Hawk? He flashed his Cheshire grin. Give me a shout. I'm still planning to pop some corn and have a space marathon. You down? He hung up, and his image winked out. I sent a text-only reply saying I had a ton of homework and couldn't hang tonight. Then I pulled up the Tomb of Horrors module and began to read it again, page by page. I did this slowly and carefully because I was pretty sure it contained a detailed description of everything I was about to face. In the far reaches of the world, under a lost and lonely hill, read the module's introduction, lies the sinister Tomb of Horrors. This labyrinthine crypt is filled with terrible traps, strange and ferocious creatures, rich and magical creatures, and somewhere within rests the evil Demi-Lich. That last bit worried me. A lich was an undead creature, usually an incredibly powerful wizard or king who would employ dark magic to bind his intellect to his own reanimated corpse, thus achieving a perverted form of immortality. I'd encountered liches in countless video games and fantasy novels. They were to be avoided at all costs. I studied the map of the tomb and the description of its many rooms. The tomb's entrance was buried in the side of a crumbling cliff. A tunnel led down into a labyrinth of 33 rooms and chambers, each filled with a variety of vicious monsters, deadly traps, and mostly cursed treasure. If you somehow managed to survive all the traps and find your way to the labyrinth, you would eventually reach the crypt of Acererak, the Demi-Lich. The room was littered with treasure, but if you touched it, the undead king Acererak appeared and opened up a can of undead whoop-ass on you. If by some miracle you managed to defeat the Lich, you could take his treasure and leave the dungeon. Mission accomplished. Quest completed. If Halliday had recreated the Tomb of Horrors just as it was described in the module, I was in big trouble. My avatar was a 3rd level wimp with non-magical weapons and 27 measly hit points. Nearly all of the traps and monsters described in the module could kill me easily, and if I could somehow make it past all of them and reach the crypt, the ultra-powerful Lich could kill my avatar in seconds just by looking at him. But I had a few things going for me. First, I really didn't have much to lose. If my avatar was killed, I would lose my sword, shield, and leather armor. The 3 levels I'd managed to gain over the past few years. I'd have to create a new first level avatar which would spawn in my last login location in front of my shoe locker. But then I could just return to the tomb and try again and again every night, collecting XPs and increasing levels until I figured out where the copper key was hidden. There was no such thing as a backup avatar. Oasis users could have only one avatar at a time. It was possible for hackers to use modded visors to spoof their retinal patterns and thus create a second account for themselves. But if you got caught, you'd be banned from the Oasis for life, and you'd also be disqualified from participating in Halliday's contest. No beater would ever take that risk. My other advantage, I hope, was that I knew exactly what to expect once I entered the tomb, because the module provided me with a detailed map of the entire labyrinth. It also told me where all the traps were located and how to disarm or avoid them. I knew which traps contained monsters, where all of the weapons and treasure were hidden. Unless, of course, Halliday had changed things around. Then I was screwed. But at the moment, I was far too excited to be worried. After all, I just made the biggest, most important discovery of my life. I was just a few minutes away from the hiding place of the copper key. I finally reached the edge of the forest and ran inside. It was filled with thousands of perfectly rendered maples, oaks, spruces, tamaracks. The trees looked as though they had been generated and placed using a standard Oasis landscape template. Yeah, placed using standard Oasis landscape templates. But the detail put into them was stunning. I stopped to examine one of the trees closely and saw ants crawling along the intricate ridges in its bark. I took this as a sign I was on the right track. There was no path through the forest, so I kept the map in the corner of my display and followed it to the skull-topped hill that marked the tomb entrance. It was right where the map said it would be, in a large glade at the center of the forest. As I stepped into the clearing, my heart felt like it was trying to beat its way out of my rib cage. I climbed up onto the low hilltop, and it was like stepping into the illustration from the D&D module. Halliday had reproduced everything exactly. 12 massive black stones were arranged on the hilltop in the same pattern, resembling the features of a human skull. I walked to the northern edge of the hilltop and descended the crumbling cliff face I found there. By consulting the module map, I was able to locate the exact spot in the cliff where the entrance to the tomb was supposed to be buried. And then, using my shield as a shovel, I began to dig. Within minutes, I uncovered the mouth of a tunnel that led into a dark, underground corridor. The floor of the corridor was a mosaic of colorful stones with the winding path of red tiles set into it. Once again, just like in the D&D module. I moved the Tomb of Horrors dungeon map to the top right of my display and made it slightly transparent. Then I strapped my shield to my back and took out my flashlight. I glanced around once more to make sure no one was watching me. Then, clutching my sword in my other hand, I entered the Tomb of Horrors. Whew!
Oh my god, it's done.
Oh, we're done for the night, boys and girls.
Hey.
Woo! That was a whole 76 pages of... That was like 10 pages just to say I went through a forest.
Yep.
10 pages to say I went through a forest to get to this dungeon that looks like this dungeon. It really was a game. It really was a book.
Ready Player One is the book of all time.
Oh, man. My throat's kind of killing me now.
You're gonna be feeling that for the rest of the week.
I still have the rest. We're only a fifth of the way through the book, and we're like 1 out of 5 days done with Guild War. 1 out of 4 days done, actually. If only we had Interlude, then we could have read for Interlude. But that will be all for today.
Sounds good to me.
We will continue tomorrow, same time, 8 p.m. PST. And I'll see you guys then.
Alright, GG's.
GG, I'm really fucking... Oh god, I need to take cough syrup or something.
Fucking water.
Oh my god, dude. Okay, I'll see you guys tomorrow.
Alright, see ya.
And thank y'all for watching here. I'll see you guys tomorrow as well. It'll be fun. Have a good night.